sweet dreams are made of this.
Okay, all. I got a really strange story for everyone today. Here in my hometown, not too far from where I live, there is a park called Sawyer Park. It looks pretty normal at first glance. A playground, disc golf, a stream and a wooded area surrounding it. All pretty normal and standard park things. The weird part is, there are a few small buildings in this park. They are abandoned though. They aren't used for anything. Not meeting places, community centers, party venues, nothing. Just empty buildings. Now everyone who lives here knows what those buildings used to be. Brace yourself, this is where it gets insanely creepy. Sawyer Park used to be a sanitarium. Yeah, you heard that right. It was a hospital, and a pretty shady one at that. It housed tuberculosis patients, and then later, mental patients. Apparently, the patients weren't treated all that well during their time there. The fact that a pretty seemingly unassuming park having a creepy backstory really intrigued me, so, of course, I thought the best idea was to gather some friends and go out there at night to see if anything weird happened. Spoiler alert, it did. So, I kinda consider myself an amateur paranormal investigator, so I thought this would be no big deal. I've been to plenty of paranormal and weird locations. The first thing I realized about Sawyer Park, though, is that its vibe was completely off. During the day, it was mildly unsettling, but at night, the energy just seemed sinister. I rarely get scared, but here I was, really creeped out. But I wasn't going to wimp out, especially since I was the one who suggested to check it out at night in the first place. After about 10 minutes of things being pretty uneventful other than some rustling in the bushes, which, to be fair, could have been wind or some wild animals, we decided to split up into groups of 2 or 3. I grouped up with my boyfriend and my best friend. We were feeling brave and headed straight for the building closest to the woods. Once there, I was feeling really uneasy. I was really nauseous, which I at first shook off as nerves. While looking around, I started to hear coughing. Not too noticeable at first, but it occasionally got louder and more frequent. The thing was, no one in my group had a cough, and they heard it too. We looked all around, thinking it was a friend of ours pranking us. No one was there. The coughing stopped for a bit, and we continued our exploration. It came back, this time louder. It was a pretty nasty hacking cough too. We decided to explore the inside of the building. There was a broken window that hadn't been fixed that we could fit through. Nothing happened for a bit, but behind the door, I heard the coughing again. I motioned to my friends to be quiet and I opened the door. The coughing was definitely coming from that room, but there was no one in there. In the corner, I noticed a chair. Suddenly, the chair started moving, slowly. We ran out of there and went straight to the car. Luckily, our other friends also got scared by whatever and were waiting for us out of the car, and we sped away. I still haven't gone back to Sawyer Park since then, not even during the day. I'd never heard or seen such clear evidence before. It is definitely haunted by some of its old patients. Back when Pokemon Go came out, my boyfriend and I would go for Poke walks around the neighborhood. Normally at night, since we both worked crazy retail shifts, but normally back home by midnight. This happened probably about a year ago to the day. Where I used to live had a massive golf course and surrounding parks, sort of scattered in the built-up suburban area. What's sort of relevant is that the golf course was a nest in Pokemon Go, so we naturally beelined there on our walks. This time we went a little bit different, going instead to one of the little parks I mentioned. It was dark, but there's plenty of streetlights. We got onto the field and there was a Pokestop in the map, but when I looked to where it was pitch black. As I watched, the streetlight closest to the blackness went out, and the next one. I had the absolute worst feeling of utter terror and dread in my stomach. My boyfriend was pushing to walk to the stop, but I couldn't move. I was terrified to my core of that dark place. And I'm not scared of the dark. And I just refused. I can't accurately portray the fear, but as close as I can is that I knew something awful would happen if we went into the dark. I didn't feel better until literal streets away, and I felt like we were followed for a while. Since then, I've been scouring the news for attacks, murders, rapes in that area, and I've gotten nothing. I recall Ted Bundy saying that the closest he got to being caught was a similar situation, where a man actually trod on the body, got spooked and booked it. I'm still thinking about it today, and have no idea what it could be, or why. Something that might also be relevant is that, since I moved out of the area, I've had no other paranormal experiences except for the resident ghost in my dad's house. He's called someone once mentioned on one of my posts that I could be more sensitive to paranormal and ghostly goings-on, and I think that may be true. But right now, I'm just wondering what you all think happened here. I can't stop thinking about it, and sometimes I see the pitch black end of the park in my dreams. It's unsettling. A girl and I witnessed something weird in a playground. One dark night at around 3 a.m., my friend Emily and I shared a cigarette on her front porch. We faced an old community playground that was built just across the street from her apartment. The night had completely engulfed the small park, and only a few streetlights dimly lit the edges. Trees surrounded the perimeter, and in its center were aging wooden structures for kids to play on. The air was already a bit eerie, but it suddenly took a turn when we heard a voice come from the darkness. It was soft enough that I couldn't understand it, but Emily and I both agreed that someone was speaking from the structures. Soon, we heard a reply, and then maybe a third, until at least 3 distinguishable adult male voices were quietly conversing in the middle of the night. And this is when it gets weirder. The voices soon came to a halt, and then Emily and I both witnessed a flashlight turn on and start looking around the playground floor. The light illuminated the ground around them, but we couldn't distinguish any physical characteristics. We heard some footsteps as they were walking in and around the structures, but other than that, they were in silence. Soon after, a second flashlight turned on. Next, a third, then a fourth, until one by one, a total of 8 or 9 different flashlights were suddenly lit and roaming the playground. Their steps grew louder as they paced across the wood chips. The lights that turned on were maybe 10 to 15 feet apart from another. So it wasn't like people huddled, turned on their flashlights and then spread out. It seemed like they were already planted in separate places at the start. Soon after, they all stopped, all at once. No more footsteps, no more lights, no more voices. It was like they all completely vanished. We were mind blown. All this happened in like 2 minutes or less. We finished our cigarette and stayed outside a bit longer. No one seemed to enter or exit the playground. We saw no cars turn on or go by. We quietly listened for more footsteps or voices, but there was nothing. We both recounted what we saw and confirmed that it couldn't have been a hallucination. It really happened. To this day, I have no explanation. Okay, so I live in a pretty rural place. The school here only has 300 to 350-ish kids in total. There is a playground behind the school and a public complex across the street. My friends and I used to hang out at this complex after school a lot. One day we stayed and decided we would go for a walk around our little town. So we did. We like walking trails in the town, so we took all the trails around the school and the complex. It was around 6 o'clock at night and the sun was starting to go down. We were walking up a hill to go back to the complex and stay there for a little while longer. But as we were walking up the hill, one of the streetlights just turned off. We thought, okay, well, maybe the battery ran out or something, because the rest of the streetlights around that one were still on. We didn't think much of it. We decided to go hang out on the playground behind the school for a while, just to chill and talk. We were 16, 17-year-olds at this time, so we weren't really going to play on the playground. We sat on one of the big playground sets. It has 2 levels to it. We were on the top level. There were 3 of us. We sat there and played a little game of sharing secrets with each other, just to pass the time until we went home. We then felt something jiggle the whole playground set we were sitting on. We all hopped up very fast. I thought it was one of our other friends down below us, moving the equipment back and forth, although it was only 3 of us there that night. But I looked down and didn't see anything. Then we saw a soccer ball rolling away from us on the ground. There was no wind or anything, and even if there was, we were between a school and the forest. I think that would have blocked the wind. Maybe 40 seconds later, we were still just standing there, stunned at what had just happened. Then, we heard something that sounded like a dumpster being slammed shut behind us in the forest. We thought maybe someone threw the soccer ball at the playground equipment, but I then called out and nobody answered. We went down and searched around, and there was nothing and nobody anywhere but us. After that, we walked fast out of the playground and back to the complex and waited until 8. That's when we left and went home. This moment was probably the scariest thing to happen to me yet in my life. My friends and I from that night talk about that night sometimes, and we still have no idea what could have made that soccer ball be thrown at the playground equipment. So, to preface this story, I was about 15 to 16 years old at the time. It was my best friend's birthday, and she had invited about 6 of us over to her place to play a few games, such as Mario Party, Mario Kart, Guitar Hero, etc., and stay the night in celebration of her big 16. So at this get-together, there was 5 girls, including me, and 1 boy. After a while, my best friend asked if we would like to go to the playground, which was about a 10-minute walk away from her house. Of course, being stupid teens, we agreed, not thinking of how it may be dangerous, since the majority of us were young girls, and it was currently 10 p.m. Anyways, we walked down to this park and continued playing Grounders when we arrived, which, if you don't know, is a game commonly played in elementary schools. The rules are, 1 person is it, The person who is it must close their eyes and try to seek the other players as they hide on playground equipment in order to tag them. But there's a catch. If someone gets off the equipment and the person who's it calls grounders while they're on the ground, they are then tagged. Yeah, I know it's a pretty childish game, but it's fun. After a few rounds, we got bored and decided to huddle around in a circle in the center of the playground equipment. We were just talking, joking around, when suddenly I heard what I thought to be something like rocks hitting the chain link fence that resided on the back of the playground. I hushed the group, looked over at my best friend, asking if she heard that too, as everyone looked at me like I had 10 heads. She asked me what I meant, and when I told her, it sounded like someone was throwing rocks at the fence behind us. She responded with the classic, "Ooh, it's a murderer coming to get us." Naturally, I glared at her, flipping her off. She knows I get paranoid sometimes, but I have a very good intuition, and something just felt off. A few minutes later, after some more rocks were thrown at the fence, and I obsessively stared down the area behind the fence in paranoia, which was all woods besides the houses on the left and right of the playground. I noticed a light weaving its way through the branches of the trees. At first, I thought maybe it was just a headlight of a car that was coming down the street that connected the street of the park, since you can vaguely see headlights of oncoming traffic through them. But I soon realized there was only one light, and it was bouncing up and down like it was being held by someone who was walking. I quickly pointed it out to the group around me as we all snapped our heads over in the direction. Coming up along the side of the nearby house on the left side of the park was a man who wore a hat, some white, baggy and dirty sweatpants, and a black coat. He was holding a flashlight, not the one on your phone, but an actual flashlight. He was too far away to guess his age, even when he sat on the swings closer to the playground equipment we were on. But we all collectively agreed it was strange, since he seemed to be in at least his mid-20s, I guess from his clothes. And he just came out of the woods by himself to sit and stare at a load of kids. After a brief discussion, we agreed that maybe he was waiting for a ride, or was just resting for a moment. So we tried to brush off the fact he was sitting and was so intensely staring at us. However, we started to take note that after a few minutes of us resuming our very competitive game of grounders, that this stranger was slowly inching his way closer to the group. He went from sitting on the one swing furthest away to the next swing, a bit closer to the equipment we were on, to the next, until he was about 10 feet away from our game. The whole time he just sat there, watching. At this point, all of us had noticed the strange man attempting to get closer to us, and in an attempt to remove ourselves from a potentially dangerous situation, we made a group decision to leave. Getting up, we all piled off the playground equipment, and in pairs of 2, we walked down the stairs on the further side, away from the creepy man. As we attempted to casually walk away, I kept my eyes glued to his figure, and as we neared the end of the street, he got up. Slowly at first, the man started to trail behind us, keeping his distance. I decided to keep my mouth shut at the time because we were about to make a turn. I thought that if he continues to follow us instead of going the other way, I'd bring it up to the others. And wouldn't you know it, the creep stays hot on our heels, not only following which turn we took, but also starting sprinting towards us, screaming,
"You motherfuckers, I'll fucking kill you."
At this point, the whole group bursts out into a sprint. The adrenaline I felt made me run so fast I was ahead of everyone else. Everyone was urging each other to run. I didn't even take a second to see if the others were behind me. That was, until I heard my best friend struggling to run. She has pretty bad asthma. I instantly felt horrible for running off on her. So I ran back to her side, grabbing her hand and quite literally dragging her along, repeating things like, "Deep breaths, you got this. Come on, we have to go now." This whole time the man was still running, screaming behind us, and was catching up quickly. At this point, both me and another girl in the group took it upon ourselves to get my best friend moving as fast as possible, both taking a hand and running at a pace she could keep. Luckily, this park was only about a 10-minute walk from my friend's house, and as we all piled in through her garage door, I turned to see this delusional man start running up her driveway. He got about halfway until our big fluffy savior ran to the open door. My friend's 100-pound, fully grown German Shepherd. She lurched at the man, barking as we gripped her collar in an attempt to keep her from running completely after the man. Luckily, her sudden and loud appearance caused the man to freeze in fear before running away down the dark, lamplit street. We were terrified for the rest of the night and only managed to sleep after putting random items next to us. We even had a rake. But the most comforting, our big, fluffy hero, just in case the creep decided to come back. So, to the crazy creep who enjoys watching kids at the park, then chasing them home, let's not meet again. At the time this happened, I was 13. I'm female. So this happened 2 years ago and I was fairly naive. I was a major introvert, only friends with a few people in my class. I wanted to be social, but I preferred to be alone and read or write. Classic nerd things. In early November, I got a text on my phone that was from a few classmates whose phone numbers I had, and around one or two I couldn't recognize. It was a group chat, asking if we wanted to hang out at night near the park at our school. My parents, being strict and paranoid, would never let me go. Luckily, or what I thought was luck, they were heading out for an overnight trip. They would be back around 4 in the morning. Everything fell into place. Once my parents left around 8ish, I ran out the door and made my way to the park. The one thing I made sure to do was lock the door. My parents were paranoid after all, and it was their biggest thing that they had ingrained into me. Once I arrived at the park, I noticed a creepy figure near the edge of the woods. No one else seemed to notice it, and I already had enough reputation as a weirdo who was true crime obsessed, so I didn't mention it. As the night drew on and on, I was having the time of my life, ignoring the gut feeling I had telling me to run. Every so often I would look over my shoulder, and the man would still be standing there. Around 9:45, 4 out of the 10 people there had to leave due to their curfew. It was getting cold and was nearly pitch black with a few streetlights every so often. The rest of us decided to go as well, since it felt more eerie and quiet. The place we were hanging out at was a field that was fenced in with a few exits and entrances. A large, wide fence with a small park in the back, and our giant middle school behind us. The front of the field faced the empty road, and the right and left sides were surrounded by forest. All of the people left were getting picked up by cars, meaning they went the opposite way to the road since that's where the parking lot was. The man stood by the right forest road exit. The man stood by the right side road exit that I needed to take to get home. I walked away from my group and tried to steady my heavy breathing. I didn't want to be paranoid, but all the true crime I listened to was catching up to me. The man was probably early 40s, late 30s, dark hair with a beard. He was probably around 5'9", but at the time, it seemed like he was 6 foot. He stood about 10 feet from the exit I had to take, so when I got close enough to it, I ran for about 30 feet through the exit and through the woods. Once I felt safe enough, I started just to quickly walk through the woods, or at least get to the road. I heard a snap and a crunch from behind me. I stopped walking for a second and quickly checked over my shoulder. Around 15 feet behind me stood the very same man. He was walking slowly behind me, almost as if he was trying not to be suspicious, but it only made my fear worse. I turned around and walked so quickly, I was basically jogging. I lived about 10 minutes away from the park we had hung out at, and I wasn't athletic enough to run home. After around 7 minutes of walking fast, I was in my neighborhood. I knew that I could run to my house if I had to, so I checked to see if he was still trailing behind me. To my horror, he was only 5 feet away. I ran. I ran faster than I've ever ran. I could hear his footsteps behind me, thumping across the concrete as he ran too. I dove down an alleyway I knew well and tried to lose him in a park, making my way home longer. I could hear his heavy breath, followed by his footsteps as he tried to keep up. I cut through houses, backyards and front yards. I finally made it to my house and flew up the steps. I looked behind me and he had just arrived at the bottom of my stairs. I unlocked the door and burst through it, shoving it closed behind me, and I heard him hit the door with his whole body. I ran around the house and locked all the windows, turned off the lights, and hid in my bedroom with the kitchen knife, just in case he got in. He didn't, luckily. If this was a better world, that's where my story would end. But it doesn't. After a few months, I hadn't really told anyone what happened since I don't want to get in trouble with my parents for sneaking out or anything. I didn't go out with anyone or any group anymore, and my loner status returned. I began to write horror stories as a coping mechanism and never went out past 7. It was around February when a classmate of mine was sharing a story of some random man following her home on the bus. She described him almost the exact same as the man who had chased me home. Another girl mentioned that he sounded like the guy who stood outside the school and tried to follow her home. I didn't join in, but everyone agreed that he was just a weird guy. He was kind of forgotten, and eventually I moved on too. Around May, I was getting ready to walk to school when my mum pulled me aside and showed me a picture of a man, the guy who stalked me actually. She told me that he had been arrested 2 weeks ago for sexually assaulting a child and had escaped last night. She told me to keep an eye out for him and to call the cops if I saw him. I was shaking the whole time I walked to school. It haunts me to know that if he had caught me, I would most likely be in her position, or even dead. So, creepy nighttime stalker who liked to hunt down young girls and sexually assault them, let's not meet again. So, I've been holding on to this experience for about a year now, and have decided to share it with you guys, mostly to get it off my chest. I work in a deep underground potash mine. For anyone who has never experienced what it is like to be several thousand feet underground, it is a very uncanny experience. There is no natural lighting, and usually the only artificial light comes from your cap lamp or any vehicles you're operating. You can hear the earth shift and the vast weight above you slowly bear down on the tunnel you're working in. I had been working underground for about 6 months and was being sent to an abandoned part of the mine to make it safe enough for crews to be sent in to recover some equipment and machinery that had been left behind. The area I was being sent in was infamous for being the location a mine operator that I will refer to as Chris had been killed by being pinched in between two pieces of equipment and having his torso split in half. This accident had shaken a lot of the guys underground, and many refused to work in the area again. So, as the junior operator, I was the unlucky bastard that had to go in. I was sent in by myself to get the job started and was supposed to get another operator to come help me once I was ready. The beginning tunnel had so much potash dust piled up over the years that it reached my knees and made it almost impossible to see while driving in my bolter, a vehicle that drives 8-foot metal bolts into the ceiling to prevent the ceiling from caving in. I remember feeling so uneasy while I was in there, like I wasn't supposed to be there. Once I got to my first location to start bolting, I began setting everything up. I was setting up bolts when I noticed a moving light come from the opposite end of the tunnel from where I had entered. I initially thought it could be another worker that was also doing work in that tunnel, so I started doing cap lamp signals, our own form of sign language with our lights so we can communicate. I signaled for whoever was making the light to come towards me. Once I made that signal, the light stopped moving and, after a few seconds, disappeared. I was becoming worried and tried to reason to myself what the light could be. It really couldn't have been another worker because it wasn't safe to go any further until my work was done. It couldn't have been a piece of equipment because it responded to my light. I was terrified and honestly didn't know what to do. I was scared to attempt to leave because my bolter kicked up so much dust, but I also didn't want to go by foot because I'd only have my camp lamp for lighting. I decided to stay camped inside the bolter till my backup arrived. The light never returned, and when my co-worker arrived, I gained enough confidence to finish the job and leave. I don't know what I saw, but I can't help but think it's the soul of Chris. The idea of his soul being trapped in that tunnel really bothers me, and I actually left the underground for a surface position, partially because of this encounter.
This happened to me a number of years ago when I was in high school. I haven't told anyone about this, so maybe writing it will give me the confidence to share. Many years ago I lived in a small mountain town, and there were many beautiful places there. There was a shrine at the top of the mountain. It was an inari one. Halfway up the mountain was an old air raid shelter, a well, and a graveyard. All the kids in town called that whole area scary. Kids at school always dared one another to go up there, especially at night, to test their courage. Eventually, my friends and I decided that we were going to go up there to see what all the fuss was about. One of my friends didn't believe in ghosts and wasn't one to get spooked easily. We arrived at the area with the well. It was surrounded by weeds, but we could see an old wooden cover resting on top of the well. There was a huge stone on top of the cover, and it was held in place with some sort of wire. We all speculated as to why this was. Why did a well need to be so heavily covered? We should have been more concerned than we were. We went up to the top of the mountain to check out the old shrine, but it didn't really faze us too much. Since we weren't as freaked out as we hoped to be, we decided that we'd all sneak out at midnight and meet back up and see what the mountain was like in the dark. When the time came, we ascended the mountain with flashlights in hand. We first went to check out the old air raid shelter, and then the graveyard. We were getting mildly spooked out. Nothing major though, just over-talkative. The moon was big and bright that night, so we could see quite well. Next, we approached the well, and for some reason I really wanted to see what was in there. I prepared for it too. I brought some pliers and a screwdriver from home to remove the cover. Lucky for us, the wire was rusted, and it came off almost instantly. With everyone working together, we were able to move the heavy stone off of the well cover. We were working together, and the sense of community was fun. You know, like a kind of heave-ho level of cheering broke out amongst us boys. When the heavy stone finally toppled, we all roared with excitement. That's a great memory for me. What comes next isn't so much. We all gathered around and shone our torches into the well. There was some old faded writing on the underside of the well cover. It looked religious. I didn't really understand it. The stench that came out from the cover being removed was disgusting. We all simultaneously took a step back. Some of my friends were freaked out and wanted to leave. I wanted to keep looking, and some of my other friends did too. I raced back to the mouth of the well. We peered into the well. Despite the brave faces we were putting on, I think we were all apprehensive. Inside the well was pitch black. We shone our torches, but we couldn't see to the bottom. We felt the cold air rise out from the pit of the well. There must have been water down there. Some friends began to shout into the well to see how much their voices echoed. One of them even spat down there. We all strained our ears to try and find out how deep it was. We expected the echo of water rippling to reverberate through the well, but what came back was something unexpected. The sound that came back was a scratching sound. No one said a word, but we could tell from one another's flashlight-lit faces that we were all puzzled and creeped out. We all stayed silent to try to hear what sound would come next. The scratching continued and then doubled in sound. Someone asked what the sound was. No one had a reply. I took the cover off of the well. I illuminated it with my flashlight and saw countless scratch marks on the underside of the cover. A horrible thought came to me. The cover, the wire, and the stone wasn't to keep everyone out, but perhaps to keep something in. I felt for sure that that something was climbing up the walls of the well. That's what that noise was. I just ran for it without explaining myself. Everyone looked surprised and gave chase behind me. We found one another again at the bottom of the mountain, and we headed to an all-night restaurant to talk about what had happened. Everyone looked pale. One of my friends didn't believe that some of us saw the scratch marks on the underside of the well cover. He said that he wanted to go back and check. No one wanted to go with him. This is where the story gets away from me a little bit, because when my friend who didn't believe in seeing the scratch marks went home, he said he saw long, fresh scratch marks in his family home store. He also said he saw someone wearing a mask nearby. I don't know if he's trying to scare me, but there were scratch marks on his door. I saw them for myself. We went back to the shrine at the top of the mountain the next day and prayed for our safety. Nothing happened after that. I don't know if it's all one big coincidence, but it scared the hell out of me. Thankfully, we're all doing alright still.
Last year, during December school holiday, my friend and I were going to East Coast Park for some fun. Of course, to see if there is any pretty girls there. It was in the evening. We were going through the tunnel at East Coast Park, at Bayshore Park. When we passed by the tunnel, there was nothing there. After all that fun at East Coast, we decided to head home. It was about 3 a.m. While we were cycling, I began to feel tired, so my friend and I decided to take a rest in the tunnel. As we entered the tunnel, there was nothing wrong there. Not even a person was in there. As we were leaving, though, I saw a girl, completely dressed in white, standing near the end of the tunnel. She was very pretty. I was amazed by her beauty. So I decided to approach her. She was sitting on the floor looking dazed and blankly staring at the wall. In my mind, I was wondering if something had happened to her. So I asked her what happened. She seemed to understand what I was saying, but she replied in Japanese, which I don't understand. We chat for a while through my friend who knows some Japanese words. She says that she was moody, so decided to come out for a walk as it was nearly 5 a.m. in the morning. She asked me to help her get home as I was cycling. I felt too tired to take her home on my bicycle, so my friend and I thought we might as well send her home by taxi. We gave her the money and she started to flag down a taxi, but not even a taxi stopped in front of her. So my friend and I flagged down a taxi for her, but the driver said bicycles cannot be put in his taxi. I told the driver that it wasn't us, it was the girl who wanted to take the taxi home. The taxi driver told us, "You two jokers trying to be funny, is it?" I argued with him, and in the end he sped away. When we turned around, hoping to send the girl home, she was gone. Later that morning, a jogger told us that a Japanese girl died here a few years ago. We were so scared that we cycled all the way home, not even waiting for the traffic lights. Till this day, I will never forget this spooky incident that happened to me.
Have you guys ever heard of a culvert? It's an underground tunnel which carries water under roads, railroads, trails, and through the cities and towns we live in. Essentially, they are large underground passages. It connects to rainwater pipes and storm drains, and during heavy rainfall, it becomes a floodway. When I was a student, it became popular to explore these tunnels. We loved exploring the culverts and the storm drains beneath Tokyo. They're really easy to get into as well. You just start off by a riverside, find the tunnel entrance or exit, and walk on in. Just remember to bring flashlights because it's pitch black in there. We didn't want to get caught by anyone in the tunnels, so we would go at night. There were so many pigeons in there. When we entered, they began flapping their wings and it terrified us. The more you walked in the dark, the more noises you would hear. There were areas where you could hear the sound of the subway nearby. In other areas, holes in the tunnels led to underground bodies of water. Being down there and hearing familiar things, and taking familiar turns in the road made you feel as if you'd been down there before. We had some really fun times down there, but one incident made us never want to set foot in the tunnels again. We decided to explore a bigger network of tunnels. The entrance was about 5 meters high and about 10 meters wide. A little further into the culvert, and we found a round tunnel about 3 meters high. It seemingly went on forever. After about 5 minutes of us walking down this tunnel, we couldn't see the entrance any longer. There was no light in that tunnel at all. Without our flashlights, we would have been in utter darkness. The tunnel was completely straight, but there were some other holes and caverns along the way. There were many rainwater downpipes connecting to the surface, and ladders leading to manholes. There was a well. It went down about 10 meters. It had some fluorescent markings on it too, so I guess that people came down here from time to time. You know, waterworks employees. So we continued exploring down this straight tunnel for about 30 to 40 minutes, and we came to a big opening. It was pretty big, about 5 meters tall, and it was about the size of a classroom. I thought I had found an exit at the top of a ladder, but I couldn't open the hatch at the top. There was some sort of wire mesh blocking it. I could see outside from the top of this ladder though. It looked as if we were at the edge of a small stream, possibly in a park. We decided not to go any further. We turned back to go the way we came. After a few moments of walking, we lost the tiny bit of light the park had provided, and we were plunged back into darkness again. Suddenly, one of my friends in the group stopped and said, "Hey, can you guys hear something?" We all stopped walking so we could listen. There was a kind of low hum or mumbling sound, like a growl, or the sound of a car idling its engine. It was such an indescribable sound. "It's just the sound of the subway again," one of my friends dismissed. "Nah, the subway's got a more continuous sound to it," another argued. We spoke about what it might be, A car or something? It was irregular, yet continuous. Then we all decided that whatever it was getting closer. We listened in silence, and then we heard the sound of water sloshing. It sounded as if something was in that tunnel with us, and it was heading our way. I could see the water moving. I thought that it could be an employee from the waterworks who came through a manhole or something. We all decided to turn our flashlights off and continue listening to the sound. The splashing of water was getting closer and closer. "This is weird, guys," someone muttered. "It's just a water leak or something," someone else said in a non-confident voice. We would have expected to see their flashlight by now, but it was still pitch black. It was coming closer and closer. "It's not a waterworks employee. Why would they be down here this late with no torch?" I said. "They could be wearing night vision goggles. What if it's a spy? Maybe it's someone playing an airsoft game, paintball or something. Then the noise would be louder, dumbass." All ideas were being discussed, some more plausible than others. The sound got louder and louder. It was getting closer. It sounded too big to be human. It sounded too big to be two humans. It was something different. That continuous growling noise was coming with it. No one had to say anything. We must have been thinking the same thing. We turned our flashlights on and started running to the exit. We heard that sound coming up right behind us. I wanted to get a look at whatever was coming towards us, so I shone my torch in its direction as I ran. But I couldn't see a thing. The growling and the sloshing thunderous footsteps sound seemed to be speeding up. We broke into a sprint. Just when I thought I was about to collapse through exhaustion, I saw the faint light at the end of the tunnel. I dropped to the floor when we got outside, panting with my hands on my knees, and I stared towards the heavens. None of us looked back towards the tunnel. After we got our strength back, we fled from the area. We didn't want to be around there any longer. We all stood outside a convenience store drinking cold coffees. We talked about what that thing might have been. Ghost? Cryptid? A spy? That sound was beyond terrifying. That growling and that footfall. I've never heard anything like it since. We were all in agreement that running for it was the correct choice. Something is living down there in the dark. That was the last time we went down in those tunnels. The thought of being down there again petrifies me. This incident has really left a mark on me. I can't be underground without getting stressed out. Subways, malls, basements, even underground parking lots, they all creep me out. Don't go down those tunnels under the sea.
In 2018, I went on a semester abroad in Korea. And one of our weekend trips was a visit to the Demilitarized Zone, DMZ, between North and South Korea. I wanted to go because I thought it was important for me to understand the place I was in better than just a short academic visitation. We drove up in a tour bus and spent almost the whole day going there, being there and coming back. Visiting the actual border of the DMZ wasn't that unnerving. The folks stationed there were very nice, and even though they warned us to mind our P's and Q's, I was still at a relative ease. I knew I had to be very respectful of this space, and tried not to goof around or take pictures of too many things. It was really educational and enlightening. Here's where the weird stuff begins. We got back on the bus, drove up the road, and were invited to walk down the actual excavated third tunnel under the DMZ. There were virtually no animals anywhere around. No birds, no bugs, no wildlife at all. The area is like a grassland with some trees, so I expected there to be some birds or squirrels, or even mosquitoes since it was going into spring. But there was literally nothing except the people who worked there and our tour group. That started to make me uncomfortable because even at the actual border, there were some pigeons and crows. It immediately had my hackles up. There was supposed to be a shuttle that goes all the way down to the armistice clock, but it was being repaired, so we had to walk. The further we walked down the tunnel, I felt like I was walking through rising water. It started at my ankles, then up to my knees, my waist, and by the time we got close to the armistice clock, I felt like it was all the way up to my neck. I started walking on the balls of my feet with my chin up on reflex because I had the physical sensation that I was trying to wade through neck-deep water. I didn't notice until my friend asked me why I was walking funny. Then, I walked normal. I felt like the water was over my head, and I couldn't breathe. When I got to the armistice clock, I felt dizzy. My vision was getting spotty and I wanted to turn back. I couldn't move my feet from where I was standing. I felt like something was pushing at my chest, and all of a sudden, it felt like I wasn't myself. I felt like I was someone else. I looked down and felt like I was wearing the wrong clothes. I remember thinking, I'm out of uniform, and kept trying to push the thoughts away and leave, but I couldn't move. I felt frozen. I was staring at the wall behind the clock, a wall that was supposed to be a barrier to keep people from using the tunnel to move between the north and the south. Even though I couldn't actually see anything but the wall, my brain felt like I was looking at a woman and her son. I don't know how to describe it. I guess it's like you're not looking at something, but your brain is receiving some information telling you that you are. I felt like I knew them. The longer I stood there, the more people I thought were there. I remember thinking, there are 12 of them. I kept stepping closer and closer until one of my friends asked me what I was doing. I didn't even realize I was moving from where I was originally standing, which was about 3 or 4 feet back from the clock. I couldn't snap out of it until my other friend tapped my shoulder and said we had to go back up and get back to the bus. When I turned around and looked at my friend, I didn't recognize her. When I turned around to leave, I remember hearing the woman saying, "Wait, where are you going?" When I kept walking, I heard her say, "Please, don't leave us down here." I wanted to cry. I didn't start feeling like myself until I got back on the bus to drop off my backpack and stop in the gift shop before we went back to campus. Apparently, I looked terrified. The cashier asked me if I was okay, and when I said I was, she kind of gave me a funny look. I eventually got over it until my friend went to Korea on a semester abroad last fall. They went to the DMZ again, and I asked him if anything weird happened. He told me that he felt the feeling of rising water too, and even the weird out-of-body feeling at the end of the tunnel. The tunnel doesn't end until you're past the border, but the end we stopped at was the clock and the wall. If you go further, like right to the wall, you get in huge trouble, and I wasn't going to risk that after already feeling strangely. He told me that there was this film they watched after the tunnel that documented its history, like when the tunnel was completely flooded to keep people from using it to move between countries. I missed the film because it took me forever to get up the ramp for some reason. I mean, I knew I was out of shape, but it felt like I got hit by a freight train for some reason. So I walked around the museum, looking at some photos of the Peace Talk complex's construction and the different complexes that are around the DMZ, like housing for the people stationed there, and for workers at the Kaesong Industrial Complex. which has been decommissioned for a long time. It really unsettles me when I think about it. If I think about it too long, I don't sleep right for a couple of days. I haven't found a good place to talk about it at length until I found this sub. Thanks for being here and for listening about my experience. My friend and I had been out driving pretty late, probably 2 a.m. We'd been going at least 70 miles per hour, slowing down because our turn was coming up, so naturally, on this 2-lane road we were leaning towards the right. Suddenly we see something tall, lanky, fast enough to avoid the car. Had to be on its hind legs. It crossed our headlights, coming from right to left, like a swoosh, but it was heading our way. And how fast we had been going, it was conscious enough to avoid us. We couldn't describe it, but the silence and the realization that my friend and I had seen it suddenly hit. We freaked out because the way it happened was so quick, unnatural. We were investigating, deducing everything, but it didn't make any sense. It was no rake, no alien, but something. We couldn't put a finger on it. Now here's where it comes back. My friend and I were talking about it again. We're searching on Reddit because my friend made a clear fact that was seen in this community's bio, which was the description of the creature being 8 feet. When we had seen this figure, she made the exact estimate that it was 8 foot standing, based on my own car's height. This scared us but brought us to the conclusion of what we've seen. It's real. We wished we had a dash cam, but like any other sighting, we only have our own minds. It was August 2016. A close friend of mine had bought 15 acres of woods in central Maine, and they invited me to live on the property in exchange for helping them grow a cannabis garden. I had lived there all summer. My bedroom was an old, dead school bus that I converted into a cute little house. We had 7 people total on the land, and everyone was hanging out in the community house, a double-wide trailer. They were watching movies and playing board games, and it was only about 9 p.m, but I was tired from work, so I said goodnight and began walking to my bus. It was very, very quiet. The moon was not up yet. I was barefoot with no flashlight, but it wasn't a far walk and I knew I could navigate with my feet. As I passed by the weed garden, I heard a noise like crunch, 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 crunch. The driveway was clear of leaves and brush, so the rustling was definitely the sound of something stepping out from the woods and directly into my path. For a half a second, I thought it was an animal, but my stomach formed a knot when I realized that the steps had sounded distinctly biped. My eyes had been looking at my feet, but they shot upwards when they heard the noise. Before me stood the creature. I don't remember seeing its legs, probably because my eyes shut up so fast and I was so stunned. It was maybe 6 feet in front of me, and it stood about 7 feet tall. When my eyes shut up, I was facing its chest, and I had to raise my eyes higher to see its face. When I saw the face, I had the wind completely knocked out of me. The creature was whitish, not glowing, but its skin looked exactly like pale skin under moonlight. Remember though, the moon had not risen yet. The form was pretty humanoid, but very tall and skinny. It had no clothing. I saw a bare chest, slender arms, and the shape of a head. I don't remember ears. I remember holding its gaze for a moment, searching for eyes and seeing nothing. No distinguished eyes, face, or mouth. But the face definitely had ridges and contour. I think maybe it did have facial features, but they were so subtle or sunken in that I couldn't make them out. Anyways, the sight of its face knocked the wind out of me. My eyes fell to the ground. They felt forced to the ground. I couldn't bear to look at it. It stood perfectly still while I gasped for air for a moment. I wanted to scream, but I had no air. I felt so paralyzed with fear. I took a moment to do a deep inhale and a deep exhale. I looked at its face again. It still stood, motionless, watching me. I then turned on my heel and ran back to the community house as fast as I could, screaming all the way. My friends suggested that perhaps I had come face to face with a person who was scoping out the weed garden to steal from it. This is common here, and the garden was flowering, so it was really smelly. The locals had definitely noticed. The part I can't answer, though, is why would a robber walk right up to me? I don't know. I consider myself a skeptic, and I think it's possible that my mind was playing tricks on me. But then again, I've never been afraid of the dark or anything like that. I told my friend this story, and he said I should share it here. If you have any questions, feel free to ask. This was probably the strangest experience of my entire life. And to be honest, it haunts me. These days, I am afraid of the dark. First of all, growing up, I've dealt with paranormal things like shadow people, things moving without anyone touching them, etc. And I swear, this is a legit story. A year ago in May, in 2020, my parents were going on their annual trip to Florida with my 3 brothers for the week. My mother asked me if I could go by their house and feed the family's dogs or stay and house sit. Being the daughter I am, I told my mother I would just stay at the house to save on gas. Throughout the week at night, I would bring the 2 dogs inside to feel safer since my parents live on a somewhat back road. Keep in mind, my parents' house is surrounded by trees, and there is a thick tree line separating their house from the 2 neighbors. Well, one night, while I was at the house alone, I had called my best friend, Bailey, to come over and stay the night. We were going to do what 2 mid-20-year-old females do when alone: play video games, watch movies, TikToks, and drink a little. While Bailey and I were in the kitchen, around 3 or 4 a.m., making homemade funnel cakes like the fat asses we are, the dogs kept moving around and staring at the glass kitchen door that led off to the back porch. I asked Bailey to let them out there so they could chill and we would have enough legroom while we were cooking. While we were eating our funnel cakes, we came across a TikTok about making homemade temporary tattoos with a printed picture and perfume. Now keep in mind, my parents have about 3.82 acres of land, and there is the family house, my father's 2-door garage workshop, and a large pole barn. Those 2 buildings are further out, near the tree line. So Bailey and I walked down to the workshop to get into my parents' work office. I punch in the code to the garage door, and we go inside, straight to the computer, and print each other a picture of Kylo Ren to try and make into temporary tattoos for each other. Before I go any further, a little side note. My parents have security cameras all around their property, and inside the office is a television above the desk, showing all of the live footage from the cameras. So while I was cutting out the tattoo for Bailey, she says, "What is that?" I stop cutting and look up at the cameras. At first, I didn't see anything except for a small figure in front of the pole barn. It looked like it was sniffing at the garage door. I shrugged it off and told her it was probably one of the many stray dogs that roamed around the area. Bailey nudged my arm quickly after I said that and pointed to the screen again. Wanting to prove to her that it was just a stray dog, I stood up and looked closer to the screen. And when I did, I saw the figure, but it didn't look like one of the small dogs. The creature was hunched over on all fours. Its arms were super thin and long, but pointing outwards from its chest. kind of like how you'd imagine that girl from The Exorcism to be when she crawled on all fours. It had no fur. Its skin looked tight on its body. On instinct, I went to open the door to look at it, but Bailey stopped me right when I grabbed the lock on the door. Looking back at the screen, at the creature, it looked like it scratched at the door of the pole barn. I immediately said, "What the hell is that?" And the creature turned its head straight at the camera, like it was a scene from The Office. When its head turned, I couldn't make out clear facial features, but it looked like it had a human head with two big glowing eyes. Bailey and I screamed, and it bolted, and I mean bolted off screen. Clearly freaked out, Bailey and I hugged each other like that would protect us. Then, something smashed against the garage door, not once but twice. Like, you know what it sounds like for someone to smack a garage door from the outside with their hand? Yeah, just like that. I called my grandmother and told her that we thought we saw something, and to stay on the phone with us until we ran into the house. Once we got into the house, we brought the dogs in, locked every single door, and took shots of Crown until we fell asleep. Now, we talked about this a few times, and I think it was a Wendigo, but Bailey thinks it was a skinwalker. But now people on Reddit are saying it was probably a crawler. Thoughts, anyone? The first experience I had, I took one of my buddies up to the San Isabel National Forest, which I've been through many times before in the day. We drove out there around 9 p.m. and rode some trails out to the heart of the forest, looking for skinwalkers. But really, I was just screwing with him and going for a trail ride. At the turnaround point, I got the cliche feeling of being watched, but was driving with my backup camera on the whole time. The trail was a bit dusty, but I started to notice an almost man-like shape running behind the vehicle from a distance. I didn't see anything at first because I thought maybe it's just me. So I stopped for a minute and asked my friend if he saw anything in the camera, and he described the same thing. We rolled down the windows and listened for any movement outside. With nobody else in the 250 square mile forest, we simultaneously heard a little boy, maybe 5 or 6 years old, cry out, "Help!" and our heads snapped towards each other, and my friend said, "Just drive." We kept moving back on the trail, and seeing the thing in my camera standing as tall as the spare 35-inch tire on my lifted Jeep while running on all fours. When we got to a fork in the trail that turns back the way we came, I decided to turn and head back because I was curious and wanted a definitive interaction. My buddy wasn't interested in proving there was bad shit in these woods, but I was driving. After a few minutes, he starts groaning loud like he was hurt and covering his face. When I ask him what's wrong, I get hit with a sensation of absolute dread and sensory overload. When I was younger, I practiced black magic, and I can say with absolute certainty that it felt like a demonic presence. My eyes were tearing uncontrollably, and I could hardly breathe or speak. At which point I turned around on the trail, and we left for good, still with a clear humanoid shape tailing us out of the woods. He later told me he heard something make a noise outside his window that started like a low gurgling but raised to a loud scream, just like a howler monkey. I never heard anything, but the sensation was overbearing and physically crippling. After getting back on the road and stopping for gas, we found muddy handprints on the rock guards and tire gate of my Jeep. It was spotless before leaving. The second encounter happened a few weeks later. I took some more friends out there, minus the one from the first trip, on what you could call an armed expedition. I was definitely disappointed in their tactical proficiency and weapon handling, considering we were all soldiers but these were the only people willing to do this with me. There were 5 of us this time, and we were armed with 2 rifles, a 12 gauge, and sidearms. After driving down the same trail and having a few odd experiences, such as hearing movement in the dark, glowing red eyes, and some heard singing, we decided to dismount and walk a footpath. This is around October, and early for snow, but of course, as we get out of the vehicle, it starts snowing, almost a whiteout. Maybe 50 meters down the trail, we hear the movement of something really big on our right side in the trees, and to me, sounded like it could only be a moose. One of the guys finds a stick teepee off the trail, and we checked it out for a bit. There were some weird bundles of sticks tied to the tree branches, but we kept moving. The one guy in our group who wasn't convinced and thought these creatures were bullshit tries to be Mr. Hardass and walked ahead of the group with just my 12 gauge and no flashlight. When I hear that movement in the woods again, I call everyone into a circle in case we got charged by a bull moose. He starts yelling, "WTF is that? Give me some light." And we shine a handheld spotlight in the direction he's holding his shotgun. He tells us to go back right now and hurry, never lowering his weapon. I pretty much had to herd him back, watching all directions, and a few times situating ourselves for a confrontation as we heard noises and more movement of something tearing through the trees, circling us from multiple directions. When we made it out of the woods and began mounting back up in the Jeep, he told me that he saw this big, pale, skinny creature just sitting there ahead of us on the trail. He said it had some thin, scraggly hair on its head, and he thought it was a log till it turned its head and looked at him in the light. We heard a few faint screams from the woods before departing. After these 2 incidents, I took a few more trips out there in similar armed groups. But aside from similar noises and others, like the sound of chains jingling, and some responses to our whistling, there were no other interactions. When I would whistle, the woods nearby would whistle back. I want to continue studying these creatures, though I'm back in Florida now. I'm hoping to find some here, as I've read on Reddit that there are encounters in Florida. If anyone has any insight or experiences, please feel free to share them. I've never posted a story like this, so I apologize if I'm not a good storyteller or something. But this is just a recount from about 8 months ago.
I remember when I was 13, I was obsessed with Indiana Jones. I was obsessed with the concept of adventure and finding hidden treasure. In order to fill that need, I would go in my backyard and explore the woods. The woods went on what felt like forever. It was always one of my goals as a child to explore all the way through the woods and into the next town. The next town over was named Jonesboro, and it happened to be about 7 miles away. I hiked what felt like an uneventful couple of hours, much deeper than I'd ever been before. Being so young at the time, I had yet to notice that it was getting later in the day. It wasn't getting darker, so it didn't faze me. I soon came across something that struck me as odd. I could see through the trees a good distance away what appeared to be a barn out in the middle of the woods. My brain tingled with adventure as I saw other buildings appear the closer I walked. The red barn stuck out like a sore thumb out in the middle of the dark woods. The other small structures were painted different colors and were different shapes. It looked like an old town, however it was scaled down to the size for children. I could tell from a distance that there were people there, however. I somehow knew that this wasn't Jonesboro. Maybe there was some smaller town in between the town I was living in and Jonesboro. However, why would it be out in the middle of the woods? Why weren't there any streets that led out here? I was confused. I walked over to one of the buildings and looked around the makeshift town. I didn't pay much attention to the people that were randomly scattered throughout the area, since my mind was still trying to process what I was looking at. At first, I wasn't afraid, but rather filled with excitement, as it would appear that I discovered a secret town out in the middle of the woods, every adventurer's dream. However, my delight did not last long, as I noticed one of the people staring at me with an unsettling gaze. They were standing a bit away from me, so their features weren't nearly as clear, but it seemed that they were frozen. The person staring continued to look at me, but didn't move. I wasn't sure what to do, but like any good explorer, I came in closer to see what was going on. The buildings were about a dozen or so, and they all seemed to be in various stages of age. Some looked older, while others seemed more new. I ignored the person that was staring at me, and I walked into the town to see other people in random poses. As I saw the other people, I then noticed that none of them had moved since I first saw the town. I then realized that the town was filled with these lifelike mannequins. Their features were indistinguishable at a distance, and now seeing that they were not people, this gave me an uneasy feeling. I decided to go into one of the buildings to see the extent of this out-of-place creation. The building, despite being small, was oddly outfitted to look and function like any other building that actual people might use. However, none of the lights worked inside. I then saw one of the mannequins much closer this time, and my brain began to slowly realize something horrifying. The mannequin had black streaks running down its face from its eyes, which appeared to be empty and hollow. This mannequin had an old leathery exterior that appeared to be worn and weathered by time. The eyes were hollow, however they somehow kept their gaze on me as I continued to examine the oddity that laid before me. Even more disturbing than the eyes was the smile that appeared to be torn, but also stitched on its face, forcing this hideous expression of an exaggerated smile. I had seen enough. I was clearly somewhere where I wasn't supposed to be. I began making my way out of the small-shaped shed when I thought I heard something outside. If it was anyone who had anything to do with these creepy lifelike mannequins, then I wanted nothing to do with them. I decided that it would be best to hide and hope that whoever it was would pass. I stood quietly as the sound got louder, and I could hear what sounded like someone dragging something heavy. I peeked outside, ever so briefly to see what would be out there, but my quick peek quickly became long as I saw what looked like a pale creature dragging a person. The creature was long despite crawling on all fours. I didn't get a great look at its face, but I could see that it had a full mouth of sharp teeth with the same exaggerated smile as the mannequins. The person lay lifeless as a tall humanoid-like creature continued to drag them inside of one of the small buildings. It finally dawned on me that these mannequins were not these incredibly detailed dolls, but rather people that had been stuffed and placed around this makeshift town. I could only assume that the creature purposely tore and stitched those horrible smiles to replicate itself, almost as if it was making itself these morbid friends it could play with. I reached into my back pocket and pulled out my glow-in-the-dark handled butterfly knife that was more for show than anything. I opened it and held it, pointing the tip downwards as I tried to slowly move out of the small building. I noticed the floors creaked much louder now that I was trying to be quiet. I wasn't sure what the creature's abilities were, or if it could even hear, but I assumed that stealth would be my key on getting out of here alive. It was soon clear that hearing was something it could definitely do. I placed my hand on my face as I held back my terrified breathing as the creature emerged from the small building and cocked its head, as if it was trying to listen. It stood upright, revealing its true height to be around 8 feet tall. The sun was getting much lower now, and the visibility was getting worse by the minute. The longer I was out here, the worse things were going to get. The creature then went back on all fours and started to inspect each building. I had no choice but to make a break for it, as it entered one of the furthest buildings away. Instead of sprinting full blast, I tiptoed out of the building and headed back the way I thought I came. I instantly knew that this was a mistake. I could hear the creature thrash around the furthest building. I sprinted through the woods in the direction I could only wish to be home. The sounds of the creature were still back at the small town, as if it was trying to figure out which way I went. It didn't take long for it to figure out where I was, as I could clearly hear labored breathing not too far behind me. At this point, I had regretted going so far into the woods, especially so late in the day. The sun at this point was now setting, but there was still a little bit of a dull glow in the distance. I was hitting low-hanging tree limbs and branches, trying my best not to trip on anything. I knew that if I had fallen, I was definitely dead. The sounds behind me were so loud that I knew it could definitely see me. I didn't glance backwards, not even once. It seemed to be screeching now, not because it was afraid or angry, but I think it was more out of excitement. The next thing I know, I'd been tackled to the ground. The tackle had knocked the wind out of me and also knocked my knife out of my hand. The creature's screeching began to sound different, as if it had suddenly caused itself great pain. I laid on the ground trying to get my breath back, as I could see my glowing butterfly knife had inadvertently made its way into the creature's ribcage. The screeching slowly morphed into sobbing and whimpering. It flailed around as I finally regained my breath. I got up and staggered my way home as the creature's sobs slowly faded behind me. I made it back home in about an hour, having jogged the whole time. I was exhausted and sore from running in the tackle. I told my parents immediately what I saw, and thankfully, they actually believed me. We called the police and made a report. They weren't able to come out until the next day. The police showed up early the next morning, and I told them where it was in the woods. They asked me to guide it to them, and I somehow mustered the courage to do it. The hike was longer the second time, and I was half expecting the small town to have disappeared, but sure enough, it was still there. The human dolls were still placed across the town, and it didn't take long for the police to identify most of them as missing people in the last 6 months. Even having shown the police the small town and all the dead people, they still found the part about the creature to be difficult to believe. I don't really care if they believe me or not. I told the truth, and there was not much more I could really do. The hike back with the police was relieving. I knew I wasn't crazy, and people actually believed me. I felt that this nightmare was now behind me, and this huge weight was lifted off my chest. That was until, however, when we got back to my backyard. As we exited the tree line, something caught my eye. It laid in the grass not too far away, but I immediately recognized it. It was my butterfly knife. Not only did the creature follow me, but it knew where I lived.
To start out, you need a little backstory to show how I got into this situation. When I got out of high school, around 2003, finding a job was difficult, so I took whatever horrible jobs I could to get by. When I found a job cleaning fire and water damage full-time, I was excited to have steady income and start saving. But this quickly turned into a nightmare that I had to endure for almost 2 years. The company I worked for put me on my first job, which was a water damage claim where a basement flooded with sewage. So after a few days of work, we finished and it was on to the next job. My boss then called me into his office the next morning and told me about a special crew that he was setting up and asked if I would be the crew leader, supervising 3 other guys that were just hired. I found this strange as I had only been working there a total of around 3 days. But I figured my work ethic was already paying off and I would get a raise. I only made 10 an hour to start. Not only did I not get the raise, but I got no training in the new position, other than a work van with cleaning material and the phone numbers of the 3 new guys that also were hired in to do fire water damage cleanup. My boss told me what tools were best to use and what cleaning products to use to sanitize, along with where everything was located in the van, with hazmat suits and respirators. But he was vague about what kind of things I would clean up. He just said the situations were always different and would get detailed instructions each job. He called my position CSC crew leader. The boss told me that I would never have to see the deceased, as the coroner would have the remains gone by the time my crew got there, and to use my logic to determine what needed to be removed from the homes and what could be cleaned. The first job I had in my new position which the boss told me about when I got into the office, was cleaning up the remains of an elderly man or woman who died in their house and had been laying in a chair. When we arrived, the coroner had me come inside to show me a few things that were considered hazardous material and needed to be removed due to the risk of disease. I guess my boss knew a few people from the county coroner's office, and much of the work came from their recommendations. Not only was the deceased still in the house, but was fully visible to me and the other guy. You could smell the rot through the masks, as the house had no AC and this was mid-June. The coroner was backed up and waiting on additional people to show up to load the body as it was falling apart. I call the body it because I honestly couldn't tell if it was male or female, and was trying not to look too long as it was disturbing. The other 3 guys I worked with handled it well, but 2 got sick from the smell and had to go outside to puke. We all waited outside after the coroner showed us the chair, the fluids that leaked into the carpet, and the basement where the fluids went through the subfloor and puddled on some boxes in the basement. The coroner's support arrived and took the deceased out, and me and the crew started working. After about 5 minutes, weird things started to happen. The first of which was when I began to disassemble the chair. I had removed the back of the chair and was putting it into the special hazmat bags that I was given. Then, the base started to rock when I was about 10 feet away, putting the bag with the back of the chair by the front door. Nobody else was in the same room, as the other guys were in the basement dealing with moving boxes. I brushed it off and took apart the base of the chair as much as I could. When I got it all into the bag, I got a chill at my back and then began feeling sick. I just figured it was the shock of what I was cleaning hitting me and pushed on, even though the chill was strange as I was very hot in full hazmat in June. Next up was removing the carpet and assessing the floor to see if it would be able to be cleaned, or if I had to remove a section of the floor. So I called the boss to ask him, and he told me to pour the special cleaner on the area to soak into the floorboards and it would be fine. So I got it out of the truck where he said it was and brought it inside. When I got inside, all 3 of the guys in the basement were scrambling to get out of the basement, tripping over each other, and all 3 ran outside. When I asked them what was up, all 3 said there was someone in the cluttered basement and they assumed it was a homeless person or junkie. Detroit has many issues with these kinds of things. I listened at one of the open windows to the basement. It's kind of the first thing we did when we started working. Open any window possible and prop the doors open. So maybe someone got inside then, or possibly before we got there, and was hiding. After listening a few minutes and hearing nothing, me and another of the workers went inside, armed with a mag light and a piece of metal fence post, and searched the basement. Nothing was down there but the footprints of the shoe covers we used. But when we started up the stairs, we heard a horrible, hacking cough from somewhere in the basement. When we looked for it, there was nothing, but the corner of the basement had a bunch of dust stirred up like someone was moving things very recently. That weirded us both out. We called the guys back in, and they got back to the boxes, but all of them kept feeling like they were being touched while throwing away material from the boxes that got fluids on them. I went back to my upstairs job and found that the cleaner I put next to the floorboards was gone, and I started getting frustrated, as it was the only jug I had of this cleaner, and I clearly remember it being set next to the area before the guys ran up the stairs and my attention was redirected. I began to take out trash, figuring I would find it eventually, or the basement guys took it for the floor. And I found it on its side, behind the bag that had the back of the chair. This is impossible. There were like 6 other bags in front of this one, near the front door, and this was a gallon bottle of cleaner. Again, I got a chill, but this one was brought on by what sounded like a whisper that I could not make out the words to. I got on with it, cleaned the floorboards and moved out the trash. Job complete. At night, each member of my crew had a dream about an older man telling us that we are not welcome in his home, touching his belongings, and we need to leave. In my dream, I was alone in his house, The old man cried and told me I was destroying his things and he couldn't replace anything. He was trying to push me out of his house, but it was like I was ignoring him. Even when he would push me and scream at me, no reaction from me. He then threw my cleaner into the garbage pile I had made by the front door, exactly where I found it. 2 of the 3 guys in the crew told me their dreams about the old man pushing them as they went through boxes of ruined pictures and other old stuff that needed to be thrown out due to the risk of disease from his fluids. They also said it was like they had no control and were on autopilot. They said they were so sad but couldn't do anything. The thing that got me about the dreams of the other 2 guys was they both said the man was getting so upset that he began violently coughing, and that the man kept grabbing their arms when they would touch boxes or throw things into the trash. Neither of the guys were in the house when me and the other guy heard the coughing from the basement. The guy that went into the basement with me said he had a dream, but all he remembered was waking up sad, like he did something wrong, and had a horrible coughing fit, which might just be a coincidence, but I connected it in my mind as relating to the other dreams. We all talked about it and came to the conclusion that we were all just having a reaction to the situation and it was nothing more than our brains coping with what we had to do. I'm very into psychology, so I rationalized it the best I could, and we hoped for better assignments the next day. The next few jobs were not so bad. Cleaning up blood at a home invasion, no casualty, but a huge mess. Then there was a few other bloody crime scenes with casualties, but nothing notable happened. About 2 weeks into the job, we began to learn the tricks of the trade and were split into 2 different groups that I was responsible to manage as crew leader. So I would have to go to different sites if the other 2 guys had an issue or didn't know what to do. I thought I was getting used to the job, as well as the other guys, as we had no other experiences like the first one. But I was wrong. The next job that there was activity was the suicide of a man that was middle-aged. The coroner had already removed the body, but it was a mess. The guy had shot himself with what I think was a large caliber handgun or shotgun, as the spray was everywhere in the basement, in like a second living room. There were skull fragments lodged in the drywall, brain matter all over, and again, he was not found for a bit, so the smell was horrible. The first step in cleaning this was using our backpack vacuum cleaner to suck up all the biomaterial. The coroner told us when we went in that he and his partner were extremely uneasy in the house, and it felt strange. We immediately started getting a claustrophobic, suffocating feeling when we went into the basement as well. To make matters worse, the family of the man had come over and were crying upstairs, but the vacuum noise helped to cancel that out. While I was cleaning, the power to the lights went out, and it was completely pitch black. This was strange because my vacuum was still powered. My crewmate started screaming at this point, so I turned off my vacuum and climbed off my ladder. I thought maybe he had touched a wire to the lights, but when my vacuum unit was turned off, he was still screaming and I could hear things being knocked over. I started fumbling around for my flashlight on my tool belt. I yelled for my friend asking what was going on, but all I got back was panicked screaming. Then I saw in the pitch black something darker that was moving in my direction, and I will admit, I freaked out. I slipped, trying to back up, still looking in my belt for the flashlight, and found it when my back hit the basement wall. I turned on the light, aimed at the blackest shape I have ever seen, and when my light turned on, I saw the shape of a man wearing a flannel shirt, beard, and an expression like he was about to attack me. Then, it was just gone. My crewmate was behind where the entity was, sitting on the floor, rocking with his hands on his head. When I approached, he picked up his flashlight off the ground and turned it on, then ran up the stairs and outside and threw up. I followed behind him. asking if he was okay and why he was screaming. I thought I just imagined the entity in the man because his screaming scared me, but he told me that he was scrubbing the wall and felt something pulling on something in his tool belt. He thought it was me, but when he turned around, the lights went out, and he was engulfed by what he said was like dark smoke. He immediately could not breathe and was struggling to move. He managed to pull his flashlight out, but it was knocked out of his hand like his wrist was grabbed with force, and he managed to scream. When he screamed, trinkets started falling off an entertainment center that was about 3 feet to his side, and the black smoke moved back. But he was so close to passing out from exertion. He also said he lost hearing and didn't know that any noise came out when he started screaming, and that the stuff falling off the shelves was landing on him. That's why he was covering his head. He said it felt like a weight was lifted off him when the dark smoke backed up, but he felt sick right away, and the light from my flashlight made the sick feeling increase. We took an early lunch where he just sat there, pale as ever, and didn't say much other than he said he breathed in that smoke and didn't feel right. I got him some Gatorade, and his color started to come back. I never told him I saw a man when I turned on my light, because we still needed to finish, and I didn't want to put that in his head, since he never mentioned seeing it. When we went back in, the lights in the basement were on again. Half the things that fell from the shelves were back on the entertainment center, and the TV was on baseball. There was also a different smell in the room, similar to burnt hair. My worker stayed a half hour, got sick again and went home for the day, leaving me to finish alone, which I didn't want to do, but had to as the other guys had their own job. After cleaning up everything with my vacuum, I began scrubbing the old blood, which is hard after it congeals. Mix in brain matter, and it is like glue, even with cleaner. While I was finishing up, I kept seeing the shape of a person, always in the side of my vision. Each time I would smell that strange burnt hair scent, and a few times I also felt like a force was pulling at items on my belt. Not sure what item, as there were several things in my belt. When I finished the job, I went to use the bathroom upstairs, and in the hallway along the way, I heard like muffled crying or moaning. I froze up and stayed still, thinking maybe a family member had come back. When I panned around, there was nothing, but I saw a picture on the wall of a man with a beard wearing a flannel. Several other pictures in the hallway of other scenarios of the same man. Different flannels with deer or fish or family. I had not seen a picture of that man, as I had not been anywhere else in the house with a bathroom. Nor did I use the bathroom downstairs because pulling off the hazmat suit is a pain. As I was securing the house, closing all windows, locking doors, and shutting down every light but the front porch light, I saw the front curtain move, and again saw the darker than black form in the front window. The last experience I will share in this thread happened mid-July in a very bad area in Detroit. There had been an incident where a guy supposedly tried to abduct a child, was stopped by people in the neighborhood who beat the man very bad, and he escaped to his house, where the neighborhood people quickly called police, and civilians surrounded the man's house to prevent escape. The police response time in this area is horrible, and the people were throwing rocks through the man's window and damaged his car. The man was hurt bad by the mob, and was hurt by a rock or glass, and died in the home. This is the assumption by Detroit PD. From what the police officer told me, it was a misunderstanding, and the man picked up a girl that was injured riding her bike, and some kids that knew her told their parents that the man was kidnapping her, and people overreacted and the man was brutally beaten. The cleanup was pretty simple to do. We secured windows, cleaned up blood and bodily fluid. But as soon as I entered the house, I just felt wave after wave of fear and sadness. Like I have never felt this before, and it hit in waves that made my legs weak. My working buddy who was there showed up late and didn't get the story from the cop like I did, but experienced the same feelings I had. The whole time we were there, we saw a form darting around corners, like it was watching us, then hiding. It was similar to a small bit of fog or mist. We also heard very slight cries for help coming from several areas in the house, and also what sounded like,
Please, stop.
and a long, no. A few times, the crowd came back and yelled at the house also. And when this was going on, the activity in the house increased, and we could hear running footsteps go up the stairs, a door slam, and it sounded like the front door would open and close, but we never saw any of the doors move. The path of the footsteps sounded like from the front door, through living room, to the bathroom, to the stairs, to the upstairs bungalow room. The part that really got me was I could feel the floor impacts that felt like the vibrations of someone running past me when I was cleaning the areas, and each time I would be hit by one of those waves of fear and sadness. When we left the house, there were a few people on porches hanging out like is usual during summer, and the people were still hostile and yelling random things, but directed at us as we loaded the van and took off the hazmat suits. We ignored this, but before we had loaded all the material from the house into the van and locked the house, the front door slammed hard enough to sound like a gunshot, which scared me and my crew member, along with the people on the front porch, to the point where they went inside. The front door deadbolt was somehow locked, and we could not get it open. I think it was a different key than the knob, so we ended up leaving several boards in the house that were left over from boarding a few of the windows. The feeling of relief when we left the house was like night and day. Inside, I was anxious, scared, paranoid, and just really down, which could be due to knowing the story. But when I got outside, it was like flipping a light switch. I immediately felt better, and me and the other guy in my crew were joking and laughing about dumb stuff and normal 19 and 20-year-old shenanigans. I have many of these stories written down in detail in a journal I started after the first 3 months of working at this job. I talked to the guys on the cruise and got other strange stories from them too. I know that some of this could very well be formed in my subconscious mind to cope with traumatic situations, but some of it has no explanation. And when I hear other members of my crew tell me their stories when they haven't been influenced by mine, that is a horse of a different color. When I have time, I will pull out the journal and give more of my experiences. The job got way worse when I started the journal after 3 months in. Several experiences with what I think was paranormal. Many situations that stressed my mental state to the point where my mask of sanity started to slip. In the end, I worked at this place for almost 2 years, and of my crew, all died. 2 from suicides, 1 from drug overdose that could have been intentional, but we will never know. I just know that when these 3 guys my age, around 19 and 20, started this job, all were normal, well-adjusted guys with no cares in the world other than girls, parties, and working. I watched each one of them slowly drain their joys and passion for life. I know this sounds bad, but each one that died was considerate enough to die in a clean way. Most likely so another person wouldn't have to see the horrible thing that we all saw so often. Three of my friends and I drove to Breezewood as a staging ground for a nice nighttime tour of the abandoned PA Turnpike, a long underground tunnel that cuts through mountains. In the spirit of October, we decided to check it out late at night, so we set off from our hotel in Breezewood around 10:30 p.m. To get ourselves even more psyched up, I played creepy music along the way as we entered the dark forest. We arrived at the entrance of a trail that leads to a section of the Siling Hill Tunnel about 15 minutes later. For the next hour and a half, it was mostly chill. We walked to the tunnel entrance, explored a little side room, and overall messed around in the tunnel by laughing at all the funny graffiti and taking cursed videos. When we reached the end of the tunnel, we spent maybe 10 minutes looking around for a way up to the ventilation room. We couldn't find a path outside, and the staircase leading up was destroyed. We turned around to begin our long walk back, but within 5 minutes of backtracking, we noticed something when we all turned off our light in the tunnel. A faint, shining light behind us. Out of what seemed to be sheer instinct, 2 of my friends began running. More of a jog than a sprint. Me and the other friend kept up. Eventually, we all slowed down and made our lights as dim as possible. At first, I was unsure of why we're being so paranoid, but one of my friends later pointed out how it's better to not take any chances of encountering someone past midnight in such a secluded area. What added to our suspicion was how the people, we assumed it was at least 2, behind us were not only pursuing us, we could tell they were running by how their light was bouncing, but how they occasionally called out into the darkness of the tunnel, and how they occasionally blacked out like we did. Our fast walk turned into full-blown sprint after we eventually heard a very loud, resonant metallic sound, like a huge gong being struck, which of course was amplified and reverberated by the tunnel's acoustics. Even while sprinting, I saw their light behind us, bouncing up and down, as if they too were running. We got out of the tunnel, shaken by what just happened, and reflected on how suspicious it was that they not only pursued us, but also turned off their lights from time to time. We were also confused about the source of what could only be described as a very loud gong. A friend jokingly brought up cultists, but I assumed they were just messing with some loose metal pipes. We all made it home safe with no sign of them pursuing us outside of the tunnel, but I'm glad we didn't take the chance of trying to encounter them face to face.
This happened during summer vacation when I was at school. Back then there was an abandoned hotel in our neighborhood. I invited 2 of my close friends to go urban exploring in the hotel one day. Let's call my friends A and B. We first tried the front door, but it was locked, so we went around the back and found that door open. It wasn't like we were on a dare or we were ghost hunting or anything like that. It just felt like a good day for exploring, and we were all free. As you might expect, the place was pretty trashed. We started in the lobby, looking around for anything interesting. Most of the rooms were locked, but we found a room on the 4th floor which was open, so we decided to make base there. In that room, the smell of dust and mold wasn't that overpowering. The bed was pretty gross though, so we pulled some chairs in from the lobby. Night crept in, and since there wasn't any electricity, we called it a night. But the next day we came back prepared. We all brought flashlights, and we headed to the hotel around lunchtime. We brought candles, snacks, and drinks too. We put all that stuff in our base room on the 4th floor and decided to check out the basement, as we hadn't done so the day before. The 3 of us descended into the basement with our flashlights in hand. The basement was huge. There were lots of rooms down there too. We were looking for a rope or something we could all hold to make sure we all stayed together and didn't get lost. It was so dark down there. I felt trapped down there. Even though it was lunchtime during summer, it was very creepy. My friends seemed to feel pretty carefree, so I tried my best to hide my apprehension. We then found another room. In this room there was a box. In the box, there were keys. We left the basement with the box of keys to see if they would work on any of the locked doors upstairs. The keys had room numbers on, but they wouldn't work on the doors that matched the number on the key. We couldn't work it out. Maybe there was some auto lock in place. We were just glad that the room on the 4th floor was open. We decided to look for a key which wasn't a guest room key. We found a key that said waiting room, written in pen. It was different from the other keys, and it didn't look too official. We noticed a locked door in the basement, which had a paper sign stating waiting room. So we decided to head back down there. We tried the key in the lock, and the door to the waiting room unlocked. The door opened a crack, and we were confronted by a terrible stench. We asked one another about what that smell could be. Was it something rotten or dead? I was really freaked out now, down there in the dark basement with this new terrible smell. I said, "Come on guys, let's go back." A asked, "What? Don't you want to know what it is?" "No man, this is dangerous. Let's get out of here," I replied. B said, "Oh, come on, just hold your nose and we'll take a quick peek." A carelessly pushed the door open and shone his flashlight inside. The flashlight revealed a mannequin with what looked like blood all over its clothes. There were dead animals all over the room. Knives were stabbed into the mannequin. Shivering, A's flashlight scanned the room to reveal scratches in the walls and on the door. I felt my blood turn ice cold. I couldn't take any more. I ran, and my friends ran with me. We ran through the lobby and out the back door, and continued running up the street for about 100 meters. We were all clamoring, screaming and going crazy about what we had just witnessed. "Why were there so many dead animals?" A asked. "And the blood on the mannequin?" I exclaimed. B started to cry. We all went home. I couldn't leave the house for about 3 days. I was so freaked out. It was around this point I remembered that I had left my bag there. I didn't want to have someone find it and then find me. I was too scared to go back to the hotel by myself, so I called my friends again, and they reluctantly agreed to go with me. We approached the back door, fear weighing heavily in our hearts. I reached my shaking hand out and tried the door, but it was locked. This was about 8 years ago. I would often tremble in my bed at night when the lights were off, remembering that event. The hotel has now been renovated into retirement homes. I can still see the waiting room in my head. I think that whoever killed those animals and stabbed that mannequin so many times maybe was recreating a murder or acting out some sort of fantasy.
This is a true story about the underground tunnels in my town that me and my friends used to visit when we were kids. We heard stories about these tunnels, so we wanted to check them out for ourselves. So like I said, when we were kids, we used to visit these old underground tunnels that were built during World War I for the military. The tunnels were small, and only one person at a time could fit inside. You couldn't go by someone's side. Also, there was no light, so we needed to carry our own flashlights. It was really hard to coordinate inside the tunnels, so we used to carry chalk so that we could mark the direction that we were coming from and didn't get lost. The first 2 or 3 times that we went there, everything was normal, but we never went deep inside the tunnels, only like 100 meters or so. One day we planned to go deeper inside, so we made a plan and went inside. My friend Mark was the first in line, then my friend Alexander, then me, and the rest of the gang behind me. The guy who was last in line was marking our path and making sure we don't get lost. But soon enough, we got lost. We started panicking, and we were inside the tunnels for 3 hours. The strange thing is that it seemed like someone was erasing our marks on the walls. We needed an escape plan, so we just continued walking in the direction we thought was the way we came in. About 15 minutes of walking, I noticed the most disgusting smell I had ever experienced in my life, and didn't notice it when we went in, so I knew that we were going in the wrong direction. I told my friend Mark that this seemed strange, and that we needed to turn back around and go back the way we came. He hesitated, but eventually agreed with me, so we went back. Then, we started hearing noises, and we got scared shitless. Everybody was hearing scratches on the wall and footsteps, One of our friends said that he saw someone behind us, but I think he was just paranoid and that his mind was playing tricks on him. Eventually, we came to the part of the tunnels that we were familiar with, but we couldn't find any of our marks. After about 1.5 more hours in the tunnels, we found the exit and went out. Now, I know this doesn't seem scary, but let me explain. That next week, I was with my parents in our living room watching the news on the TV, when I heard that the local cemetery sunk in the ground because some of the underground tunnels broke. And then it hit me. The smell I noticed while we were down there. We were under the cemetery. I can't really explain how our marks managed to disappear from the walls, but there was no one in the tunnels except us. After that experience, I started to believe in all the stories that I heard about the tunnels, and I swore that I would never go near those tunnels ever again.
This happened when I was at primary school. My school was a bit strange. There was an underground tunnel or passageway connecting different parts of the gym, the lower part to the higher part. Halfway along this passageway was a small room. I used to belong to a school choir, and I used to call that room the dressing room. I used to use it to store my bag and my personal things when I went to practice. I used to think of it as a green room, you know, like before I went out on stage, like I was a star. I was a kid. Around the summer holiday period, the gym was set to be remodeled. I didn't like it, but I couldn't do much about it, I guess. I was thinking about losing my beloved dressing room, walking home after school, when something dawned on me. I was pretty sure that I had left behind one of my stuffed animals in that room. I had to go and get it. There was no way I was just going to leave it there. I hated the idea of it being crushed under all that rubble. So, even though school had finished, and I was on my way home, I had to turn back. I headed over to the janitor's office, and I asked if I could still get in, and he said, "Oh, don't worry, Mr. K is still in the gym. Go ahead, but hurry up." So I headed over to the gym, walked in, I couldn't see Mr. K anywhere. I wanted to let Mr. K know I was here. He was a pretty strict teacher, so I knew that if he saw me down here, without me announcing myself, he would be annoyed, and I might be in trouble. Plus, I didn't want to be locked in all night. So I started looking for him, but I couldn't find him anywhere. I guessed that he must have been in the gym's bathroom or something, but when I knocked the door, I got no reply. I felt that time was ticking, so I headed over to my dressing room to get my stuffed animal and get out. I decided to run down through the tunnel and into the dressing room, grab my stuffed animal, and get out. The whole process should take about 30 seconds. I started heading down the tunnel as quickly as I could. Walking down that gloomy tunnel was pretty weird when school wasn't in session. Then I smelt something terrible. There was a gaping hole in the ground, ahead in the tunnel. I remembered that there was a manhole in the middle of the tunnel, close to the dressing room, and it was open. I thought that there might be a person down there. Did they already start the construction work? Or was that Mr. K down there? I didn't want to know, to be honest. Either way, I thought I would be in trouble. I decided to sneak by without causing a scene. I got past the manhole and I heard some sounds behind me. I really didn't like it, so with fear likely painted on my face, I hurriedly got into the dressing room, but I held the door slightly open and watched to see if someone would emerge. I saw a flashlight flicking around at the end of the tunnel, then Mr. K. He had a big duffel bag with him. He was carrying it over his shoulder. I was curious as to what he was doing and what he was holding. It was weird. Whatever it was heavy. He was struggling and grunting as he fumbled with the bag. He threw it down there. He threw it down the manhole, and it landed with a heavy thud. He then tried to shut the manhole. He seemed desperate. I thought that since he was struggling, I could announce myself and offer to help him. I took one step out of the dressing room, and he froze and spun his head around and stared at me. "Who's there?" he shouted. This really freaked me out. Remember, I was in elementary schools. It was so jarring to have a teacher shout at me in the dark tunnel after school. He stood there glaring in my direction. I didn't know what to do, but he looked so mad. I just ran for it. I was terrified I would hear his footfall echo up the tunnel behind me, but I didn't. Even though Mr. K wasn't the nicest teacher, I have never heard him shout at a student like that. I was convinced that he mistook me for a thief or an intruder. It was frightening to me. I thought I had upset him. During the summer holidays, I went back to school a couple of times. They used to hold pool events, and it was always fun to see my friends there. The first time I went back, I saw that parts of the gym were in the process of being demolished. By the time the following week had rolled around, half the gym lay in ruin. It was odd to see it like that. It was the second or maybe third time I came back to school on one of those pool days, and I noticed that the gym was now completely destroyed. I noticed something else at this point too. There were police cars in the parking lot. I watched the police officers leave their car to be greeted by the principal and the janitor. They walked in the direction of where the tunnel and my dressing room used to be, and that's all I saw. Mr. K never came back after the summer break, and there was a small Buddhist altar set up in the new building, which sat on the land the gym was on. Even though I didn't understand at the time, I knew that something was wrong. Something happened with Mr. K in that duffel bag, and I am just glad that I ran when I did.
Near Central California, there's an old mining community that you've probably never heard of, called the Motherlode. It's an area of California that was a large part of the gold rush. That is where this story takes place. On the way out of town, down a long road almost like a stretch of highway, you suddenly veer off to the right and go down a rough, older road, less than a quarter mile down. The road dead ends into a circle parking area with a gate at the end, which is kept locked by the city. If you were to go past the gate, you would end up at a popular lake in my area. When you park at the end, you are basically surrounded on one side by steep hills dotted with poison oak and tall pine and oak trees. The other side is a steep downhill slope to the lake. So basically, you are in a bowl. We were told that if we were to go up to the left, up the steep hill, that there would be an old mine, long abandoned by the miners that the county didn't close. About 250 feet up the steep hill, we found the old mine, almost hidden in a slight divot in the hillside that you wouldn't see unless you walked right up on it. To get into the mine, you had to climb down a slight slope into the ground and go over some medium-sized rocks on the ground, leftovers from when they blasted into the mountain. The mine itself was about 7 feet tall and 6 feet wide, which formed a tunnel that was about 250 feet into the mountain. The mine had rough rock walls with a colorful vein running through the left wall. This vein is said to indicate the presence of gold by its ribbons of colors. The tunnel followed along that vein, taking at least 2 turns with a couple of short, dead-ended offshoots. As you got deeper into the mine, you had to step carefully to avoid mud, which is what the old ore cart tracks were handy for. Ore carts hauled blasted rocks out of the mine on like mini railroad tracks. Once you were inside the mine, it was completely and utterly dark and silent, except for the sounds of the wind howling and dripping water. We took our time walking down the dark tunnel until we eventually reached the tunnel's end, a wall of solid rock. Disappointed, we started on the way back to the entrance. My buddy decided to stop near the entrance to chip some sample rock from the vein in the wall. He promised to be quick, so I just stood and waited for him. I maybe stood there for a couple of minutes before I heard the first strange sound. It sounded like a small pile of rocks toppling over, echoing up the shaft towards us. I tried to tell my buddy what I just heard, but he didn't hear me, so I just let it go. Not even 2 minutes later, I heard it again, and this time, closer. That time I got his attention to tell him what I just heard, but he just thought I was being paranoid. He said, "You're just hearing an echo from me." I tried to take his word for it, but again, not even 2 minutes later, there it was again. That time the sound came with a feeling of panic and fear. That was when I literally just said, "You only have to be faster than your slowest friend." Then I just took off running, over the rocks and out of the mine. When he came out a few minutes later, he said he walked back to the end and didn't see any fallen rocks. I didn't go back there until a few years later with another buddy of mine. Same as before, up the steep hill we went. The mine looked exactly as it did before, front to back, with no signs of a cave-in. Just as my other buddy had done before. This friend just had to stop on the way out to chip away at that damn vein, winding along the left wall. As I was standing there waiting, I heard another strange, scary sound. But that time, it sounded like a rattle, and we both heard it. The only way we could describe it was it sounded just like a baby rattle. We both froze and looked at each other, puzzled and anxious, illuminated in each other's headlamps. Not even a couple of minutes later, we both heard it again. The sound of a baby rattle. We both grew up here, so we knew it wasn't a rattlesnake or anything, which are common here. When we heard it the third time, the creepy feeling came right back to me, and I just ran out of there as fast as I could, practically tripping on the rocks on the way out. I haven't gone back since. I can't describe it. Something about that old mine just came with a bad, scary feeling, and both people that went there with me felt it as well.
I used to work in Scarepapa Gulch, Oahu, Hawaii. Some years ago I worked for a solar firm as a warehouse manager. I was in charge of their warehouse, which was located at the Scarepapa Caves. The warehouse was 2 rented caves and the surrounding lots which were fenced in. These caves were old military storage units dug into the gulch walls. The caves were about 200 foot deep and 20 foot wide and tall, reinforced with concrete. The solar firms stored their equipment and their materials in the cave. The lots were where vehicles, heavy machinery, and a few 40-foot containers were held. I worked there with my driver. The caves had no electricity or plumbing, so a solar system and a backup generator powered the caves, and a porta-potty provided relief. Cell reception was spotty at best, so I would have to drive out to make cell phone calls. I started working there and I had no information on the history of Scarepapa Gulch. My work schedule was 6 a.m. to 3 p.m. When I started work, a lot of times it was still dark when I got there. I had to power up the caves. If the batteries on the solar system didn't have enough juice, I'd have to power the generator. I'd normally have to do this using only the light from my phone. It was pretty quiet at our units. The neighboring caves were quite a distance away, and they were primarily used as storage, so we didn't really see anybody around. Rarely a truck would pass by going up to the units further up the gulch. At first it was like any other workplace, nothing out of the ordinary. But soon after I started to notice some weird happenings. The first thing I noticed that was weird was the dead animals. Walking around the site, I would find dead jacks and chameleons all over the place. They were just there on the ground dead. I figured cats were getting them, but I also noticed that their carcasses were intact without damage. Looks like they just fell off from trees around the cave. There were a lot of dead mongoose, minor birds, owls, pigeons and ducks, all intact carcasses with no predatory marks like bites or scratches. Pretty weird, yeah? Now on to the really weird stuff. Every few days or so I would hear banging coming from inside the containers. The containers were under lock and key. Every time I would hear banging, I would have to unlock and open the containers to make sure nobody was inside. I would open the containers and find nobody or any animals inside. After a few weeks of this, I said fuck it and stopped checking. I figured that the materials inside were adjusting to the temperature changes. While working in the cave one day, walking to the back end, passing a certain spot, I smelled the strong scent of body odor. It was like I passed by very close to someone, but there was no one in the cave that day but me. I walked to the back of the cave, did what I needed to do back there, and proceeded to walk back to the front of the cave. As soon as I got to the spot where I smelled the BO, I smelled again the strong odor, just as before. It seemed like I just passed by very close to someone. I got to the entrance of the cave and quickly checked if I forgot to put deodorant on during my morning routine, but no, I did have my deodorant on. Was my mind playing tricks on me? I had a small desk set up at the entrance of the cave where I work on a laptop. I would check emails from the office and do paperwork. Every so often I would hear noises coming from the back of the caves. Noises were like something moving, and it sounded like something large, bigger than a mongoose or a cat. At first I would go back to check it out, but after a few times of finding nothing there, I said fuck it. I chalked it up to the equipment, adjusting to temperature changes. One early morning while it was dark, before my driver left on his route, we heard a woman screaming, coming from above the caves. The gulch walls were about 100 foot up, and the sounds came from the top. It sounded like domestics, and went on for about 15 minutes. My driver and I figured that there was a subdivision up there and a couple were just having it out. A few weeks later, during a lull in work, my driver and I decided to drive up the gulch to check out other caves. We drove about a mile up the gulch and came to the last cave. From there we could see our cave and what was directly above it. To our amazement, on the plateau above the cave, there was no subdivision, no houses, no roads, no nothing. Who was screaming up there? What the fuck? Who was up there screaming? We had a lot of machinery, vehicles, electronics, mechanical equipment, solar systems, etc. Everything would seem to crap out, even our personal vehicles and property. We would have to call the technicians to come and repair the equipment and machinery. They were constantly there repairing stuff, but what was weird was a lot of the times they would come down and find nothing wrong with the equipment, where all of a sudden the equipment started to work fine. After a while of this, we started to video ourselves, starting up the equipment, so that we could show them we were doing it correctly, and the equipment was in fact not working before we called for a repair. But this is the creepiest thing that happened to me there. One day I loaded my driver up, and he left for his route. I then had to go do my business. I went to the porta potty and locked the door. Before I could do anything, the stall began to shake back and forth. I yelled out, thinking that my driver came back and was playing a joke on me. I unlocked the door, hopped out, thinking I would find my driver laughing, but no one was there. I ran up to the cave to see if anyone was around. Again, nobody there. I called my driver. The call went through, and he was already on the freeway. He thought I was crazy after I told him what happened. After that, I tried not to use the porta potty as much as I could. After a year there, I was laid off due to a slump in the solar business. Only then, I decided to seek out the history of that place. Why don't you look up the history of Old Hawaii Kipapa Gulch and let me know what you think. By the way, one of the caves across from where our caves were is where the illegal fireworks disposal crew lost their lives. It is said that a crew member was smoking in the cave where they stored seized illegal fireworks.
This happened about 2 years back. It all started when I went on a solo mountain climbing trip in Tohoku. I started my climb at roughly 8 AM. I made it to the summit of the mountain by 12 PM. It only took about half the time I went up to get back down, so I was left with some free time on my hands. I decided to take in the scenery. I headed down a road around the cliff face. It was a refreshing change from the mountain trail I had spent the morning on. I had read online that a lot of people pick their own vegetables in this area, so I thought I'd give that a shot, take a wee keepsake back home with me. So I was foraging around deep into the cliff face forest, getting some good stuff and enjoying the scenery. I found plenty of wild mushrooms and lots of interesting plants. Then, up ahead, I saw a dark black shadow about 30 meters away. I got closer and realized it was an entrance to a cave. I was curious, so I stumbled through the bushes towards it. On closer inspection, it was incredibly dark, but plenty wide for entering. I had my mountain hiking headlamp with me, and I had been caving a couple of times, so I thought, why not? It's pretty cool discovering a cave. Here in Japan, if you discover one, you get to name it. And if a new large cave was discovered, it would be on the national news. So with those thoughts on my mind, I went in. I didn't want to tell anyone about it since I didn't want anyone to claim it for their own. I really felt as if this was an undiscovered cave. I had to check it myself. The cave floor was rough and ragged and littered with puddles. It was big and surprisingly wide. It opened out into different areas. It was big enough to stand up in too. So I wouldn't get lost, I dropped some of my vegetables as makeshift markers, Hansel and Gretel style, in the hope I would easily be able to find my way back to the entrance. After about 20 minutes of walking around in there, I met a dead end. Well, not a dead end actually. There was a hole, 2 meters wide, enough to squeeze my body through. I was sure I could get through there easily and continue exploring the cave. I didn't have the courage to enter the hole. Fears of claustrophobia and the idea of being trapped alone in the dark there were insurmountable. Instead, I shone my torch inside. I saw that after about 1 meter or so, it opened out again. I could see stalagmites on the cave floor. I panned along the ground with my headlamp and saw something humanoid in shape. I'll never forget the moment my eyes landed on it. It looked like a mound of hardened mud at first, but it wasn't. It was a humanoid shape on the cave floor. It had long limbs, dark, hardened mud-like skin, and tiny eyes. The eyes, they looked useless. It was thin, and looked as if it was bigger than a human. It was only partially visible, but the second I saw it, I let out an involuntary scream. I was just laying there motionless between the stalagmites. I turned my head away almost instantly, and as if in response, I heard something groan from that chamber. It didn't sound normal. It was like some inhuman grunt. Things weren't normal in the cave and I had to get out. I needed to be out. I ran for it. Some innate instinct told me to flee, and as I did, I barely kept myself stable. I weaved in and out of the puddles and around rocks. I heard the flutter of bats behind me as I ran. Behind the flapping of wings was a definite inhuman groan I had heard moments ago, except this time I heard footfall. It sounded like someone or something was running. I tripped and skinned my knees. I got to my feet as soon as I could and kept running. I saw the light of the exit of the cave up ahead as the bats flew past me overhead. The sun was setting when I got out. I kept running towards the ridge and climbed down. It was 7:30 when I arrived at the parking lot below. Thankfully, there were some people around. I asked them for help. My leg was in agony from my trip in the cave. My knees were covered in blood. An older gentleman drove me to the nearest hospital, and I was immensely grateful. The wounds on my legs were deeper than I realized. The man who drove me to the hospital stayed with me until midnight and invited me to join his caving club meeting, so I did. I told them what I had seen in the cave, and they theorized the following. The growling sound I heard was probably made by the echo of the bat wings. They told me that seeing humanoid-shaped masses in caves is entirely normal. It is a conditioned response to the darkness for humans to find shapes which the mind can easily recognize. They were all interested in checking the cave out, and so was I, since I might be attaching my name to it. A few days later, I was invited to go back to the cave with the group to check it out. My injuries hadn't healed, so I declined. I heard from the group that they went in search of the cave but weren't able to locate it. After several failed expeditions, they called me again to double-check the location. Eventually, they managed to persuade me to come back and show them the way to the cave myself. I couldn't believe they couldn't find it, and I started to wonder if I had hallucinated the whole thing. I quickly understood when I got there the reason why this bunch of caving enthusiasts couldn't find the cave. It turned out they weren't the best map readers. The thicket outside was more overgrown now. It gave me the chills to be back there. I could see that thing in my mind's eye. We all stood in front of it, and there were about 10 of the caving club members in attendance. I still believed I saw something humanoid on the cave floor. There was an atmosphere outside the cave which was unexplainable. The leader of the caving club said, "Come on, you look into the chamber, and it'll be nothing but a disappointment. Trust me, we are going to light the place up for you too," he said as he tapped his torch. Everyone was armed with a torch, and that made me a bit less anxious to go in. Plus, I realized I'd look pretty dumb if I didn't go in. I mean, what would I do? Just sit outside waiting for them? Once inside, thanks to the torches, the whole cave was illuminated. It didn't seem as daunting anymore. I could see more of the cave now. I was surprised to see less rocks and debris on the ground, and equally surprised to learn that the cave ascended and descended in areas. All 10 of us went in, and sadly I couldn't see any trace of the humanoid creature I saw. It took us about 30 minutes to scour the entire cave and reach the point where I saw it. One of the caving club guys wasted no time and attempted to climb through. He said that there was about a 4-meter drop the other side of the opening, so it's just as well that something scared me off. If I might have been braver, I might have fallen and been trapped in the darkness alone. One thing I noticed was that the stalagmites had been broken as if some path had been created. I looked totally mad to the caving club members. I felt a bit foolish. It all seemed so real. They seemed happy enough. They wanted to come back with climbing gear and explore the place where I saw the humanoid creature. I didn't want to be part of that. I mentioned that my Hansel and Gretel wild vegetable trail was nowhere to be seen, but I guess some animal could have gotten them. A few weeks pass, and someone from the caving club calls. They investigated the other chamber. They said they found a pile of strange things in there. Climbing gear, watches, bones, clothes, and a pile of vegetables, which had begun to rot. Something was in there. Probably still is. I don't ever want to go back. I work in a school here in Germany which is from grade 5 to grade 13. Back then it used to be another school, but they changed it after a fire in our school's gym. I worked as a social assistant for the afternoon classes, and ever since I started, I felt a presence in the halls of one specific building, the Building C. It all started when I heard complaints from the cleaning ladies that our faucets randomly started running. It confused me a bit because on that day, no one used the bathrooms. It got worse. Doors and windows locking and unlocking. Most windows have these little locks that you pull down so no one can open it, but we find those unlocked several times after locking them. Lights break, even after the janitors fix them, especially one specific light near our office. Things always go missing. Mostly keys or keychains, just to find them hidden at random places. We are still looking for that one key. We have a glass door in front of our bookcase, and when we close it, it usually is open again after a few hours with dirty handprints on it, even though no child went near there. No one quite believes me, but I'm thinking that we are dealing with a trickster spirit here that just loves to mess with us. Lately, it started to be more active again, ever since kids came back from their online meetings. It was less active during quarantine, only locking and unlocking a few windows and that's it. I also heard it knocking against the tiles in the bathrooms, where I presume it is often, as most complaints come from the female bathrooms in the buildings, such as knocking or locking the doors or the faucets. Tell me what you guys think. If it's a spirit, ghost or maybe something different. So when I was in school, about 14 years old, me and my friends said, let's go climb around on the roof of their school. I went to a different school than my friends. To this day, I'm not sure why, but it was a warm night and was the weekend, so we thought, why not? We get to the school, which was only about 10 minutes away from our houses. This place just straight up looks creepy, like it looks more like an old hospital than a school. But we hop over the fence and head to the part where you get up to the roof. So we are messing around on the roof for a while, and my friend Kay says, I want to show you guys the basement. So we get down off the roof and get to these stairs that lead to the door. Kay says he's going to check if the doors are unlocked, and me and my other friend, W, wait for him at the top. He shouts down to us that it's unlocked and to come down. So we do. This basement was a whole different vibe. Like, we weren't really joking, we just had our phone torches on and were looking around it as if someone was waiting down there for us. We checked, and we were definitely the only 3 down there at the time. While we were looking around, we see a load of old school stuff, like desks, chairs, that type of thing. We looked around a little more and decided to leave, so we could check some other stuff out, and I was the last one out the door. My friends were waiting at the bottom of the stairs. Just as I go to shut the door, all 3 of us hear this girl's voice clear as day say, "Why are you leaving?" And we just ran up those stairs and hopped back over the fence. We were all freaked out for a while, and after calming our nerves, all 3 of us were 110% sure we never saw anyone else in that basement. Some time ago I came here and talked about a spirit that is in one of the school buildings I worked at. Now I don't work there anymore, but I still go to school there and have a contact to the people working in said school building. Now the spirit has been doing a few things before I left, and I wasn't the only one who experienced those things. First of all, the spirit started calling people by their names. At least, that's what happened to me. I wanted to leave the building and go home. I was the last one left, so I was tasked to lock all the doors when I suddenly heard someone calling my name. At first, I thought it was my co-worker who had stayed a bit longer. But when I turned around, no one was there. The doors were all locked too. The last day of my work, I was sitting in our office alone, and I felt a weird surge of sadness. But it wasn't about me leaving. It was some kind of loneliness inside me that made me sad, but I didn't know how or why. That feeling would get even stronger after I heard my co-workers talking about how the building is going to be demolished, so the students have more room for their break time. That feeling vanished as soon as I got home, and I had a feeling that the spirit didn't want to leave them. I might go back from time to time as I still go there for school for a year. I hope that until the building is gone, I will have the opportunity to communicate with said spirit. Me and my friend are very close to each other. We hang out very often. We usually walk around our village, talk about stuff, or we're just on our phones. For some reason, we usually go pretty late, from 6 p.m. to 9 p.m. Tonight, it was the usual, like always. We were just walking around some random places, around the park, church, and around the school. It was around 8 p.m. when we were behind our former school for the 3rd time that day. Nothing out of the ordinary happened before. It was pretty dark outside. The only thing that was providing a bit of the light was the school hall. Right in the middle of it were 2 white lights. We were walking the pathway like usual, until I saw a tiny dot on the ceiling of one classroom. I stood there so that I could see what was up. My friend was right next to me. I was standing there for about 7 seconds and just staring at the ceiling, when my friend grabbed me by my jacket and said, "We need to go. Now." I was confused as we started running for no reason. I looked back at the classroom window. There was a small fraction of light that was visible in front of the classroom door. Enough for me to see what I saw. There was a human-like figure just sitting down in front of the teacher's desk. It was looking at us as we were running away. I was terrified and started running even faster. We ran for about 80 feet before we started walking again. I asked my friend what that thing was. It scared the hell out of us. Apparently, my friend told me that he was looking at it while I was distracted by the dot on the ceiling. He explained that the figure was looking in the direction of the door when he first saw it. After about 5 seconds, it turned its head towards us. That's when he grabbed me by my jacket and we started running. He described the figure to be skinny, about 6 feet tall. There's really no reasonable explanation to this incident. The school staff are the last that stay. Their shifts finish about 3, sometimes 4 p.m. and no one else has the key. The strangest thing is that it was our third lap around the school that night. We didn't see anything until the last time. At the end of the day, I still have no idea if that was a paranormal experience or if that was just something else that is unexplainable. I guess we'll never know. In 2016, I was an administrator at a middle school in Dallas, Texas. It was not unusual for me to go up to the school to do work on a weekend. This day was a Sunday in September, around 2 p.m. It is a large school building with a capacity of 1,100 6th, 7th, and 8th grade students. It was built in 1997. I was changing the letters to the message on the marquee in the front of the building, so I had to make a few trips from the front office to the outside of the building where the marquee is. I was the only person in the building, and I have to arm and disarm the building alarm. I would send a message to the teachers if they were allowed to come up to the school when I was working, but on this day, I didn't tell anyone I was going to be working, so I expected to be alone. I was almost finished and went down the hall about 3 offices to use the restroom. While I was in there, I heard the heavy front office door open and close. It's an older building, and the doors are heavy-duty metal, so they kind of bang shut. Then, I heard 2 female voices talking, and became faint as I assumed they were walking towards the main hall of the school, away from the main office and restroom that I was in. I thought it was odd, because I had not sent the building will be open from this time to this time email, so no one should have been up there but me. Still, teachers work a lot on the weekends, and I thought they saw my car and felt okay coming in. As I walked back to the front, I looked down the main corridor. Even though the building is huge, a person can still see from one end to the other, because each end has a glass foyer. I didn't see anyone. No big deal. After about 15 minutes, I finished what I was doing and was going to leave. This would require me to arm the alarm system, and false alarms incur a $500 false alarm fee from the city. Since I thought some other teachers were in the building, I needed them to leave with me. So I got onto the public address system and made the announcement. If you're working in the building, please call extension 25200 because I am about to leave. I waited and began turning off lights and packed my things. About 3 to 4 minutes pass, and no one had called up front. At this point, I look out front to see if I could see any cars in the front parking lot, but there weren't any cars. At this point, the hair on the back of my neck stood up, and I got a bit weirded out. I made the announcement one more time, in case they didn't hear me. At this point, I would have crapped myself if the phone was to ring because I was pretty sure the voices I heard were not teachers. Needless to say, I was really creeped out. Grabbed my things, armed the alarm, and hustled out. I drove around the entire building to make sure they weren't parked in another parking lot, and to verify no classroom lights were on. All lights were off, and all 4 parking lots were empty. The alarm would have been triggered if anyone was in the building and left after I left. So I'm a custodian at a local high school. My shift is 4 p.m. to 12 a.m. We have a pretty large performing arts center, and I honestly hate cleaning it at night because it's always dark when I go in, and I have to search around with my phone's flashlight until I get to the light switches. In the back of PAC, there is a classroom, 2 bathrooms, and a makeup costume room where there are at least 8 mirrors each on both sides of the room facing each other, creating an infinity mirror. It terrifies me to go in there and look into them most of the time. My experience happened when I was out there with a coworker. He is more sensitive to energies and feels them right away, whereas I don't really notice shifts in them unless they are pointed out or they are majorly different and noticeable. We walked into the makeup room and he stopped and said, "Did you feel that? The change in energy?" And I told him no, but then I left and came back into the room maybe 5 minutes later. And since I was already thinking about it, I instantly picked up a heavier, deep feeling in the atmosphere when I walked in. I described it to him, and he said that's what he felt too. Off and on, I'll hear things rattle like doors and things around the back of the building where the makeup room is, and I'll feel uneasy. But it wasn't until I had my fiancée start working with me yesterday that things got more pronounced. She used to be Wiccan and had dealt with a lot of paranormal and demons who stayed with her for years. And on top of that, she's an empath, so she's more susceptible to energy shifts and entities. I made the mistake of talking about the weird feelings and sounds I get when I'm in there while we were cleaning in the back of the PAC. And when she was walking around, she said she felt something brush her back. We also walked through the doorway to the bathroom and it got significantly colder, even though we were in there not long prior, and it felt the same temperature as the other rooms. When she pointed it out and we were talking about it, I started hearing small voices, and I couldn't tell if I was just making it in my head or if the squeaky door I was leaning against was doing it, but I told her to stop talking, and I stopped moving the door. And then she heard it too for a second. We left and had my coworker come in and help us. He left the building with us across the room, and by the time we got to the hallway to the door, we felt cold for a second, and then back to the regular temperature. People are telling me it's a possible poltergeist, given the fact that they are created unintentionally, and because it's a theater building where plays go on. Someone could have been really into a character, or angry and accidentally created it. Others have said it's most likely intentional. Does anyone have any ideas? I'm not sure what it is, but it terrifies me. The middle school I attended was once the first high school built in the downtown area of my hometown in the early 20th century. Comprised of 3 main halls, a gymnasium, and a large office building where the library and auditorium were located. At this time, my mother worked in the main office and would work through the summer while students and teachers were gone. On one such day, she was in her office alone when she heard the front door open and the sound of a group of children walking toward the office. She called out with her normal friendly demeanor, expecting them to round the corner any moment. Instead, she heard the door to the auditorium open and the sounds go with it. Now, thinking some children were where they were not supposed to be, she quickly got up and walked into the auditorium to tell them to leave. She was confronted with only empty and lonely seats and the dark, unlit stage. Feeling uneasy, she began her exit, and as she did, she heard a child giggle somewhere in the darkness. Shortly after, she was again in the office alone, when suddenly she heard a loud banging coming from the library above her. Worried but dutiful, she made her way up the stairs and opened the door to the library. Every chair and table was tossed and tipped aside, haphazard and cluttered. Scared and annoyed, she quickly reset everything and made her exit. She would go on to complain for weeks about this repeating in that same location. The final and most extreme of her experiences happened in the office. She was filling paperwork and organizing things for the assistant principal, who was not on school premises at the time. She was walking back and forth between her office, the conference room, and the assistant principal's office. She had just walked into the conference room and felt a sharp and aggressive tug on the back of her head. She whirled around expecting to see an assailant, but there was nothing. Determined to stand her ground, she mustered up her courage and shouted out that she would not be bullied or made afraid, and that she had work to do, as if reprimanding a child. After which things calmed down in that building. The 8th grade hall was a whole other matter entirely. The summer going into 7th grade, we decided to do a little ghost hunting of our own. A trio comprised of myself, my mother, and my grandfather entered the empty hall in the late afternoon. We sat on the old steps in silence for a while, looking down the hall with our backs to the entry to the girls' gym. After a while, we began to hear what sounded like footsteps on the old basketball court in the girls' gym. Startled but excited, we quietly walked into the empty gym. The court creaked and whined as we walked across it until we came to a halt in the middle and just stood there for a minute. An eerie feeling came over us, and a creaking began to sound from the court, as if footsteps were circling around us. Feeling uneasy, we began our exit. As we opened the double doors of the gym into the main hall, all three of us looked down at the end of the hall that connects the 7th and 8th grade halls together and saw a tall, thin and inky black figure swiftly glide across from right to left and out of sight. Filled with hormonal courage, I charged down the hall towards it, but by the time I reached the end of the hall, there was nothing to be seen. Freaked out, we called it a day. Sometime later, after school hours, I had just finished training with the track and field team and was walking up to the main office where my mother was. As I was walking, I began to hear a loud and repetitive banging noise. Confused, I looked around for the source. I looked up and through the high windows of the girls' locker room. I could see a single locker door opening and slamming shut repetitively, with force by itself. I stood there for a minute, in bemusement, thinking it was a vent or something causing it, but no other locker doors near it moved. It continued to slam loudly as I made my way to the office. I don't know when it stopped. The final tale I have from this location is the one that creeps me out the most. Over summer going into 8th grade, while the buildings were mostly empty, a group of electricians and custodians were tasked with climbing up into the crawl space above the 8th grade hall to solve a problem. They were going on about their casual conversation in the front office where my mum was, drinking coffee and laughing as she heard them exit and head to the hall. About 20 minutes passes, and she says they all enter the main office. None of them are talking, no laughing. Their entire demeanor now off. These big burly man's men are now pale as paper and are avoiding eye contact with her. She approaches the main custodian, a friendly, usually candid older gentleman, and asks him what's wrong. He brushes her off in a somewhat rude manner, that nothing is wrong and that they're just working some things out. 2 years pass and none of those men will speak a word about it. Until one day my mother confronts the main custodian, demanding what made him act so craven that day. He breaks and finally tells her, says that he and a few of the guys went up into the crawl space that day. That they had been working up there for about 10 minutes when they saw something. Something that scared these men so badly that they would rather be reprimanded for not doing their job than go back up there. Men who pride themselves on their integrity, turning away from their responsibility out of fear of what was up there. When she pressed him for more details, he refused and told her to drop it, never speaking about it ever again.